All right, it is 6 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the December 9th meeting of the Board of Directors, Addison Northwest School District. Looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any changes or additions, deletions from the agenda tonight? All right, all in favor of adopting as written, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Brings us to board and committee reports. The superintendent's report.
So my report was primarily about budget, and I know we're going to be entering into a lengthy conversation about budget, so I don't know how much you want me to reiterate that at this point. Also, I did give an update that we met regionally with our representatives and the other two Addison County school districts recently, and that was, I think, we all felt like that was a very productive conversation. We were eager to have that continue, so we scheduled another meeting sort of midway through the session, so January, February-ish, we'll get back together. We didn't obviously reach any resolution. That wasn't necessarily the goal of the meeting, but we talked about facility needs in the district. Mount Abe is an aging facility, so they have a lot of needs. Our facility's in great shape. We talked about declining enrollment just in the region. We talked about the spending caps and penalties and the struggles with staying under the threshold and those challenges. We talked about transportation costs, and I think you guys are aware that our all three districts contract with Betcha Transportation, and all three contracts expire in different years, which we talked about the benefit of having those contracts perhaps expire in the same 1 year, so that the three of us could go out to bid together on transportation and maybe at least get a competitive bid offer, which we don't currently seem to get. So what could be done perhaps even if the state were to bargain a transportation contract at the statewide level like they're doing with healthcare, and whether or not schools could benefit from that. Some school districts do still own their buses. We talked a little bit about whether it would be cost effective for one of our districts to buy buses, or should we all chip in and buy buses together? So again, we didn't reach any resolution. These were all just things we talked about. So you can see the other things that we spoke about. In terms of miscellaneous updates, I reminded you that we had 2 UVM outstanding educators this year, Kim Simmons from Addison and Becky Ebel from BUHS. So we had a nice day at UVM celebrating their accomplishments. And then I stuck in an interesting thing that popped up in our NASDAQ monthly update, just in terms of New England's declining enrollment, which I thought was very interesting, and it shows Vermont is among the highest in experiencing declining enrollment, as well as Connecticut and New Hampshire. So it looks like everyone's going south. It's warmer there, I don't know. And cheaper. Warmer and cheaper.
So does anyone have any questions for Sheila? I think we'll let Elizabeth talk a little bit about the finances before we have the big discussion on budget. But if there's any questions for anything else for Sheila now? Yes?
About the transportation.
Yes.
Has the agency done any look, and maybe this, we're going to have to wait for the standard chart of accounts, but has the agency ever looked into, like, whether owning your own buses is better than not owning your own buses? I mean, has anyone ever in the state looked at something like that?
I think all kinds of districts have looked at it at various locations for different reasons, but not necessarily at the state level. I mean, I think it's a question that a lot of school districts probably ponder, and those that have owned their own buses probably say it's not more beneficial, and then those that haven't owned their own buses might be thinking it might be. So it doesn't seem like there's a consensus as to which one is better.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I think the thing that's the struggle for us, at least this is my understanding, that we've not had any competition in terms of going out to bid. So regionally, Betcha is the only company that's currently bidding, which of course I think probably drives up the cost for us over time.
Two things. The reason we don't have buses is because it was determined before my time on the board that it was too difficult to arrange for substitute drivers. And that made it very difficult to make sure that all of your buses were running first thing in the morning. And a question about the contracts. If our contracts are staggered, what's the penalty for canceling a contract so that we can all get on the same timeline?
I don't recall offhand what the penalty is. I mean, they let us change the terms of our contract.
They have.
This year, with changing the number of buses. So,
Right.
I mean, from my brief interactions with them, they seem very accommodating. The additional 2 years were add-ons from the.
From the original
From the
contract.
original. So, our current contract has been extended by 2 years, but the original, it's different even than the original term. So I think we could negotiate that.
Is it that they structure the contract so that
I'm not sure
there's
they
higher-
did that deliberately
Okay.
to stagger them, or if it's just coincidental.
No, I mean,
I'm
but they
not-
structure the contract so that there's a lower increase in the
Later years.
later years
Yeah.
of the contract, right?
Yes.
Are the
So that it's
contracts
to-
similar on a per pupil, per mile, or whatever
Yes.
basis?
Sheila, the other, do we have more bus? I had another comment
go ahead.
about the meeting with the other board chairs, superintendents, and legislatures. The one kind of moment that I felt semi-hopeful, it was a good meeting. These were useful discussions, but one of the things that somebody, and I can't remember who suggested it, said that there might be, although there's not a lot of relief coming from the state, there might be a way to bracket off some of the things, some of the increases in per pupil spending. So, for example, we wouldn't be penalized for health insurance increases in our per pupil spending numbers.
Calculation.
Was that just kind of a spitballing, like what kinds of things, or do you think there might be a possibility that something like that would happen, and if so, do you have any suggestions about what we?
I don't have any idea. I mean,
Okay.
I think that was spitballing to a certain extent, but I also think it was, I agree, a very hopeful suggestion. And then I do understand that there's, a proposed bill to look at ed finance, so who knows what will come up in the context of that discussion and debate. So I think it will be a lively session. And I look forward to the opportunity to meet with them again, not a year from now, but sort of midway through to check a pulse. I think everyone is, eager to continue the collaboration in ways perhaps that they haven't even been in the past. I just think that we know how critical our situation is here and everyone's paying attention.
So to that end, any ideas or suggestions that we have for the legislators if we can get them to work on one of those ideas that might be helpful to us.
They seem very open and eager to help.
Okay. I mean, I think they're gonna have to convince the governor to pay attention. He basically came down among us, all of us in Addison County, trying to figure out what to do with declining enrollment and budgets, and looked at us all and said, it's just about math and you figure it out.
It's a local issue.
This is a big problem. It's more than just our representatives that we need to be speaking to. Anyway, did they talk about that? Did you all talk about the governor? Because the governor wasn't very unhelpful
Well,
in those quotes when he came to talk to us about these issues.
We did talk about the stresses that the Agency of Education is under because it's underfunded and, or undermanned, understaffed. And we've seen this in our deliberations because of the Unified Chart of Accounts not being able to go through Code of Accounts and the difficulties and delays in getting the numbers for the per pupil spending. And this is not a new thing. They know it, we know it, everybody knows it, and So, I mean, I think the governor needs, the more voices that he hears that say, we need our systems to run properly so that so that our administration can do its job, so that we can do its job.
I think we need to invite him to a board meeting,
Ooh, I like it.
or, to meet with board of directors across the state. That's what
Interesting.
Maybe he could come in February to the Addison County Gathering.
I have another question, if that's okay. Can I?
Yeah? Yes.
Okay.
you may.
Look, there's some things that we can do, and there's some things that the police can do that are out of our hands. But on Wednesday, there was a lockdown at the elementary school and at the high school, and there's just a lot of misunderstanding or confusion about what happened, about why it happened. I'm not saying that you need to have all of those answers. The police will have some of those answers. But a year ago, we signed on to a call to action to prevent gun violence. We talked about the things that the district was doing. We talked about the things that we were asking of ourselves and our community. We talked about, we wrote a letter, we have as safe as we can possibly be at our schools. And I'd like to know what the after action, like, the kids were frightened on Wednesday, as were teachers. And I'm uncertain if there was an actual gun event.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, I want to know what we know.
It was first thing in the morning, so the walk and roll to school was happening, so there were a lot of local police accompanying students at that time, and apparently someone, a resident of the Virgins community who was wearing apparently noise-canceling headphones, thought that she heard the sound of gunfire and called it in. And so the dispatcher notified the police, who said, all right, get the kids in the school and we're going to go into lockdown. And so that all took place over the course of, maybe 15 minutes that the police then did walkthroughs through the building and determined that they were safe, and we came out of the lockdown. So from the police perspective, it was very well managed, and we did everything that we could. We have only just within weeks come out of an ALICE training, which is an active shooter training. So it was unnerving for our staff to find themselves in a situation where they were being called upon to be in a lockdown situation. But there was never at any time an active shooter that we were aware of. So the police were exploring where this sound could have come from. We later learned that a transformer blew at that same time somewhere nearby, so we wonder if maybe that was the sound that someone heard. We don't know. No one knows. But in terms of the response and staff, yeah, staff was rattled and within the building. I don't know, Stephanie, if you maybe want to talk about what happened in the building after the lockdown and anything that happened to support staff or students.
We called the lockdown over and sent some information out to staff, and then it was the early release day. So shortly after that, it seemed like the day was over. We did have a faculty meeting to address what happened, and I walked the staff through exactly what had happened. A lot of the staff circled up with their students that they had. We didn't do anything specific immediately afterwards, but we did talk about, as a faculty afterwards, perhaps the need to do that in the future and take a break and circle up. We are implementing the restorative circle, so that would have been a good opportunity to do it. Frankly, it didn't occur to me, and it wasn't brought as a suggestion at that time. I of course wish that I had implemented something like that, but we learn from each one of these what we need to do, and of course each one is different. So we use the loudspeaker for this one to communicate to a certain degree, realizing that we probably wouldn't have the ability to do that in the future. So we talked about it's really important for faculty to have an electronic means to communicate. So grab a Chromebook, have your phone or whatever, so that we could, because that is a pretty reliable way to communicate silently to the faculty and to students when we're able to do that. So.
I'd also like to add that Ken is also our Director of Safety, and he summarized the entire event in an outline for us as administrators to debrief. So you categorized each component part of what occurred and where we can tune this for the future. But from my opinion and the opinion of the local police, we handled it exactly the way we should have. So as Stephanie said, each of these opportunities gives us a chance to think more deeply about other things we can also add. But you know, I think we did a good job.
We also survey faculty when we drill or when we have these real events. We survey right afterwards and to gather as much in the moment information. What worked, what didn't, what did you notice about your room that perhaps you never noticed before that we need to attend to? Is your blind broken that you've never pulled down this year? You know, those sorts of things. So we gather a lot of that. That's been shared with Ken, and we're going through and making those fixes where necessary and gathering the information to do some additional training.
Okay. So this was a false positive or something like that, or a false alarm.
Well,
right?
it was never determined what the sound was or where it came from, so.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for everyone. I don't think, we said this before a year ago, and that we need to be able to talk about this with everyone all the time, because school safety is the most important thing. So, thank you.
And quickly, do the police have a way to assess a threat? Like, is there some kind of step-by-step process they go before they say, yes, you need to evacuate? Like,
Well, they didn't tell us to evacuate, they told us to lock down.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
Lockdown.
and yeah, they're following their own protocols for threat assessment and so forth, and acting accordingly. I think in that particular case, no matter who heard a sound like that, the outcome would have been the same. Had the police not asked us to go into lockdown, but we heard that same sound and didn't know where it was coming from, we would have initiated the same protocol while we notified police and made a determination. So that would be the same. But in this instance, we were following the police direction because they were already on site and involved.
And they walked the properties.
Yep.
Inside and out.
Yep.
So last year, the Facilities Committee meeting got a report from Gloria and Ken about our updated safety procedures. Would it be appropriate to have another update to the Facilities Committee, and then the Facilities Committee could report back to the board as opposed I mean, because there are things that, as I agree with John, that we should be having a public conversation about, and there are things that are internal that we should probably not be having. Okay. Thanks.
Just one last thing, you know, it sounds like Stephanie is already thinking about adding the students' wellness after something like this happens, but that, you know, we're really focused on their safety, but we also need to be focused on their well-being, which is going to be at risk after something like this happens, and it's going to be a significant risk to their they're going to be scared to death, like John said. And also our staff's wellness. So anyway, as we go forward, I think that's a really good thing to keep on thinking about and implement after. So thank you.
Before we move on to Elizabeth. Thank you.
One, just real quick.
Sorry?
Seems like we have a
We're almost
UVM
done.
honoree every year. Is it every school district has one? How does that work? Okay, got it. Thank you. And congratulations to the teachers. Thank you.
In my report, I didn't talk a lot about budget because I knew that in Sheila's, she had a lot about budget, and I knew we were, actually, the second reason is we were still working on both scenarios of the budget, so I couldn't really say much when I was writing this, other than the fact that we were working on both. I did talk about that we have found a new hire replacement for our accounts payable specialist. Dan Jewell deserves a shout out. Today was his first day working with Carol, learning all that she knows. And it sounded like they had a good day, and they will get back at it tomorrow morning. He'll be shadowing her and training with her until she leaves at the end of December. So he's got a couple of good weeks of training, one-on-one training with her. To learn her, I know, crash course, right? Luckily, the rest of us do know how to do most of everything that Carol did. But in celebration this month, we have a couple of donations that were received by the district. That's an action item later, just to approve those. One was for Ferrisburg Central from Mr. and Mrs. Norton Davis for $100, which was designated to be spent on winter clothing for families in need. The second is for Addison Central for the Flying Pig Bookstore in collaboration with the Bixby Library for $100, and that money would be spent on new books for the school library. We appreciate all the support and thank the donors for their generosity. We have this month's financial reports. There's nothing real surprising in any of those. It looks like we're right on track with the current year. There's some information in my report regarding the sign that was mentioned at the last meeting. So hopefully everybody read through that and understands how that kind of transpired. In our work plan for review and compliance this month, we had policy F20. Basically, my understanding is we just have that so that I review it, confirm or affirm that we're following the policy and the guidelines that are in that. And so I wrote in my report this month that we did that and that we are in compliance. And then we didn't have any specific deadlines this month. We also do have announced tuition, which will be also an action item. We felt that it was prudent to get it in on the December meeting, just because January's meeting comes so close to the deadline. And if we, for some reason, had a weather issue or something and had to postpone a meeting, we wouldn't make the deadline for that. And then we have budgets. We have two different scenarios to share, but I'm figuring probably we want to wait till the discussion to kind of go through those.
I think we can, well, if there's any questions about anything else for Elizabeth at this point, and then I think we may as well delve into the budgets now. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
Audit draft. I have received an audit draft just recently. I have not, and I've received the management letter and an engagement letter. So I've reviewed and responded to the engagement letter. I have reviewed the management letter and I agree with it. I have not gotten through the actual audit draft to confirm everything and our understanding. So that's why I'm not reporting on it yet, because I just barely got it and I haven't gone through it.
So we won't have it till January?
It'll be reported on in January, but I mean, I'll probably have confirmation as to whether we agree with everything that's in that audit draft within the next week.
And were there any surprises in the management letter?
No.
Okay, that's good news. And then, maybe you can't answer this question, but this is the first year I've really recognized that we have this December 1st letter that comes from the agency that talks about what the increase in the overall projected increase in education spending for the entire state.
Yep.
And somehow the agency came up with $72 million increase, and I assume that that is what they think all the budgets are going to pass in the state.
Yes.
Right?
And that is informed by business managers that attend FASBO every month.
Okay, so they're getting that information from,
Yes.
from,
They basically did a poll among all the school districts to see where their budgets are looking like they're going to come in. Unfortunately, like in our situation, we have 3 or 4 scenarios of budgets, and so I pretty much gave them a range. You know, if we do this one, it'll be this. If we do this one, it'll be this. So I gave them a range, and I'm sure that other school districts did the same. They compile all that data in some way that I'm not really sure how they do that, but at the end, that's where that 6% quote comes from.
and do we have any idea what last year's projected rate increase was going to be?
I don't recall them projecting a rate. I recall them suggesting that they wanted their rate to be no more than 2%. I remember that. They didn't quite do the ask in the same way. They kind of put it out there that they wanted to see it only increase by 2%. So this year, they kind of just said, where are they coming in? And it's looking like 6%, rather than placing a demand or a benchmark.
So
on
this
it.
is the first time we've gotten a letter like this?
We've gotten the letter, and it comes from the commissioner. It doesn't always say the same exact things.
But isn't this 6 cents? Not percent?
6 cents.
No, it's a
So
5% increase that's going to produce a 6% property tax increase
It's
overall.
Yeah. I mean, either which way you look at it, it's based on $100 per,
Yep.
you know,
Right.
so it really is 6 cents
Okay.
or 6%. You can look at it either way.
But that's, before we start with an increase in our budget, we're already looking at 6 cents on everybody's property tax bill from the state.
No,
That's what
I
I'm trying to
disagree.
figure out.
I disagree. When they are talking about a 6%, it depends on which side they're talking about. If they are talking about the municipal side, so like the cities and towns, there's that side of your tax rate. If they're talking about that tax rate, then yes, that's how much people's property taxes, their taxes would go up regardless of the school, right? But when they talk about the school district's tax rate, and they say 6% is what we're estimating, they're compiling that from the information they've received from us. So they're assuming that the average increase is gonna be 6% amongst all the school districts.
They're just throwing a total confusion factor in there.
Well, there's
Yeah.
a statute that says they need to issue this.
They have to issue the letter, right?
Have they estimated how many county districts will go over the level funding?
What's that?
Have they estimated how many districts, what percent of districts they think will go over the level funding?
We'll go over the threshold, or?
Threshold, yeah.
No, they haven't. They don't, yeah.
So Elizabeth, they did forecast the income yield, or the homestead property yield and the income yield. Will those impact our predictions?
So, those are in, the new estimates that they've given have been reflected into these two budget versions you are going to see tonight. They do not help us, neither one of them. So the threshold changed, and it's about $50 off from my estimate, and it's in a bad way. And the yield changed by about $191, I believe, and that also was in a bad direction for us.
Just want to go back to the question before, so I had also interpreted that the 6% was like what the state's gonna do, and then anything we do comes on top of that.
Yeah, that's not my understanding.
Did they, so that's
I
the.
could confirm that, I could.
Well, I'm just wondering,
talk to them.
is there any sense for what that number would be then? Like, let's say we made no increases, what's the state's portion gonna be? Is it too soon to have any sense for where
I
that
think
might?
it's probably too soon, because
Okay.
there's 51 districts.
Right.
I think
Depends
that
where
are all
everything else.
contributing that information, and
So any
none
estimate
of us
wouldn't
will
be
have our
valuable.
budgets until we all have them together at the same
Yeah,
time, right?
okay.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. But I can confirm that, if there's kind of a misunderstanding about what that letter means and what their quote is, but I'm pretty sure, my understanding is that the 6% is based on what we all come up with
Yeah.
collectively as school districts.
Right, that's my understanding.
George.
Yeah. I'm sorry, George, go ahead.
But what that would mean, let's say we did flat fund.
Then we're helping that number, and that number would go down for the state, right?
Okay,
in
so
theory.
some of us flat fund, some of us
Go over it.
go over it, and it ends up 5%. I mean, it doesn't mean our taxes stay flat, is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, if what we
Because-
do bases what our tax rate's going to do, not what they say the average is. So if they say, oh, we believe it's gonna be 6%, but we come in at 2%, then we have now therefore affected that average in a good way. But it's
just a prediction.
Yeah, it's a prediction of the average. They're trying to give the whole state an idea of how much your taxes might go up.
Okay.
That's it.
So it's not a very valuable number at this point.
I
other
think
than-
what George
Yeah.
is getting at is if we do our hard work, but no one else does their hard
Yes.
work, we're gonna be indirectly impacted by those
Right.
choices.
Right.
That-
And that happened last year. We came in below and whatever their requirement was. I think they, or whatever,
Right.
the year before. I think it was the year before, not last year, but the
Yeah.
year before. We came in below. And then next year, we came in higher than what their average was. So we've kind of gone either way with that as well as any other district.
All right, should we move on to budgets?
Okay, so I'll hand these out. Do you want both of them at the same time, I assume?
Sure.
They look the same.
They look the
so
same.
it's hard.
So you've got to really pay attention to the top part where it talks about ACS repurpose is one of them. The second one is below the threshold. Okay, that's what they're called on here. So this is, one is my tax calculation worksheet, and then the other is the expenditures that go along with that for each one.
Absolutely, yep.
New guy on the board question. So we're not approving a budget tonight?
No.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
What would be good to do is to decide on a direction for this budget so that we can give direction to the administration on which of these sort of three drafts to further refine.
The final approval is second meeting in January, or first
We
meeting?
have to approve it by January 22nd, which
Okay.
is our second meeting in January, yes.
Thank you, I thought that today was the last day.
No.
Before the clerk's on the 23rd of January,
Okay,
Yes.
yeah,
40 days before we.
thanks.
And we need copies over here too, so if we can pass those back around when they get all the way to the end, that'd be great.
So we have the do nothing that we had looked at last time.
Right, we didn't reissue that.
No, right,
so
but
we
I'm
have that linked
just to remind
my
everyone.
Right.
report,
Okay.
and it wouldn't be reflective of the new yield. So that has
Or
the
threshold.
old information about using the old threshold and the estimated yield. So
And-
those would need to be updated for comparison purposes. But as Elizabeth already said, it impacts us in the wrong direction.
Negatively.
Do we know
So-
how much?
Well, we had originally estimated about a 9-cent increase. I think my estimate would be that it's at least 13 cents.
13.
That's, you might want to check with the
With the expert.
the
Check with
expert.
Elizabeth.
That's, yeah, but that was my estimation.
Does that seem
13
about?
cents instead of
13
9
cents, yes,
Yeah.
that's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep,
So
from
the
9 to
do
13.
nothing is 13. I love the names of her
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah.
So we could call them A, B, and D. A for ACS repurpose, B for below the threshold, and D for do nothing,
Oh,
just for the purposes of this conversation.
okay, so do you, Elizabeth or Sheila, do one of you want to give us a little bit of a,
Well, which one would you like to talk about first?
how about A?
Okay, so that one is fairly straightforward in terms of what it was we were trying to accomplish. You know, this is repurposing Addison Central School as an alternative school. So in the process of that, we would eliminate the staff, with the exception of one classroom teacher would need to come over to make our class size policy work. And again, when we're talking about staff that works in one school, it isn't necessarily that specific staff that is eliminated because we have a process for that with seniority and so forth. So one position would need to remain to come over to VUES to accommodate the 60 or some odd students that would come over to VUES under that model to make the class size policy work. So this budget is reflective of an elimination of 9 professional staff. That's made up of classroom teachers, specials teachers, library, art, music, so forth, special educators and speech language pathologists. It eliminates one administrator, 1 admin assistant. It reduces our food service costs, and it reduces a custodian position from a full-time position to a half-time position, keeping in mind that the school is remaining open for a different purpose. So we would still need custodial services. So,
Good question, I don't know if this is the
Yeah.
right time for this, but under this proposed repurposing, how many of these positions would we need to bring back on specific for this, this new program?
Kara, do you want to speak to the staffing at the alternative school? And again, these, just so that you're aware how, I think you're very well aware of this because you used to work in a high school, but your licensure plays a part here. So staff that's licensed to work in an elementary school isn't the same license to work as at an alternative high school necessarily. So again,
Yeah.
it's not the same staff.
I think bring back on is the
Yeah.
wrong phrase, more like how much of a net
Yeah.
cut is
So
there actually
I
going
mean,
to
in
be?
general terms, just to plant this idea in your head, the alternative school is a cost-neutral shift.
Mhm.
So, the number of staff and so forth, doesn't affect your bottom line because we're saving money, by bringing this service on our own campus, rather than, absorbing those costs to our general fund, which is what we would have to do if it remains in its current location, because those costs are not going to be reimbursable next year as they have been in the past. So we have to bring this onto somebody's campus, whether it's ours or someone else's, to avoid that hit, that financial hit. But if you'd like to speak about the staffing,
Just
Kara
really
can
quickly, I think it'd
certainly
be beneficial.
speak
but
to
yeah.
that.
So the proposal is for a 6 through 12 program. We already have a program. It's housed at the counseling service in the basement. And we all provide staff, all as in 3 school districts of Addison County. We provide a humanities ELA teacher. So the proposal we're moving the program on to an on-site location is the proposal. And the staffing would be a humanities teacher, ELA teacher, a STEM teacher, math science, a director, which they already have, 2 behavior interventionists, which they already have, a school-based clinician, which we already have, and then adding a part-time special educator to provide the special ed component to the program.
I do have, I didn't realize that this didn't go to the full board. After the last meeting, Kara had created an FAQ about this specific alternative programming in general. So this is just this is just in reference to this change. So I did email this to you when I realized it didn't go to the full board, but I also have this in hard copy for you. So, and it does have those staffing listed on it, on the back.
And that staffing would be paid how?
Through a consortium agreement that we have used in the past, and we've actually worked out a draft to have the superintendents and lawyers look at again, and it's a 3-way split, which is currently how we pay for the program. So it's not really changing that much, it's really changing where it's housed, so we can A, have our students on our own soil, and B, continue to use a reimbursement model for special ed to pay for the programming.
Okay, so to answer Keith's question, we're already paying for all the same people that we would, so none.
It's just
Right?
that
I
we
mean,
won't be able
they'd
to
be moved.
reimbursed for it any longer if the special ed funding change. Same way that we're being reimbursed for it now. So it's going to hit our general fund if it were to stay where it is, essentially.
So do the people that are running the program now just move to Addison?
Not necessarily.
No, because some of them are contracted through CSEC, some are through us, some are through Mount Abraham, some are through Middlebury. And what our proposal is for the 3 districts to run it together, because it's a little challenging with the mental health agency to be running an education part. Their responsibility, is really the therapeutic component. So having their influence and their parts around the therapeutic component, obviously the mental health, the school-based clinician piece.
So I apologize if you said this before, but did this topic come up when you met with the other folks? The Mount Abe and.
We did, I mean, we talked about it as an example of ways that we are already that we collaborate across the 3 districts.
This most recent meeting.
Yes. Like we share food service and we share some sports programming and so forth. This is just another example of ways that we share across our district. So we are sharing, this is just changing the location of the program, essentially, and it it needs to change. So if it isn't coming on our campus, then we will likely see that that one of the other two districts will find a place for it, so that, so that we can continue to offer this. Pardon me?
Is there a window of time for that, like if we don't jump on this sooner rather than later? Yeah,
Oh,
today.
I mean, I
Is there
think
a-
they're waiting for us to resolve, I mean, they know that we're all working together on this. So if you decide to move in a different direction, then we're gonna start having a different conversation with those two districts about, okay, where else can we put this? Because we need to find a place for it. It's not an option.
The other piece, it's best practice, like our students should be on one of our campuses, not in a basement. So,
And that was the other, I did send you another link to an article that's more aspirational of what alternative education can be. So we're trying to just provide the therapeutic learning environment for our students to maintain what we have. And what I also sent you, that other article, was just sort of like how it can really fulfill a need for students way broader than how we're thinking about it now. So that's just another consideration. If it's located in a place like Addison, we can really grow the program, make use of the space, the location, the fields, the outdoor learning environment, all of those pieces. So.
This comes into that a little bit, related to the space. Are there any costs associated with reconfiguring the space? Okay, so it would be the same space?
Not right now. I
And
mean,
then-
if we decided to grow some aspect of it, let's say we decided to, add some tech ed component or something to that effect, or more of an agricultural component or a sustainability component, those would all have costs associated, but could also perhaps draw students from other districts to want to
Right.
tuition into
That
the
makes
program.
sense. But right now, you're not projecting any
Mm-mm.
costs for putting
No.
up new walls and things?
No.
Is there specialized equipment that needs to be purchased to meet the needs of these students? Okay, and then I'm hearing no's.
No.
Related to transportation, are there additional costs or perhaps even savings for transportation if we're not sending people as far?
Yeah, that's already embedded
Okay,
into
that's
the
already
plan.
embedded.
It's already embedded, and it actually does save transportation, because right now, some of these, students, we're transporting them elsewhere,
Okay.
further away.
So, I think I heard this, but I'm not sure. What, you laughing at me? Okay, so, thank you. This the FAQ says in fiscal year '22, and we're looking at fiscal year '21 budgets. So does that mean that we could actually wait till fiscal year '22 to do this?
to the census, moving from a block reimbursement model to the census model.
Okay.
The state is saying all alternative programs need to be an approved independent school, like the 42 currently approved independent schools, like Bell Cape, Baird, Center Point. Or you could have an alternative program, but it has to be on public school soil.
And that's effective July 1 of '22.
21.
There's two different changes.
Act 173 is effective in '22, but this is not part of Act 173. This is just their determination of a rule that they believe should have been there all along.
And that's effective July 1, '21.
Yes.
So whether, we have Addison voters saying they don't want to close their school, if we don't do something about this alternative program, either one of the other campuses will pick it up, or nobody picks it up and our budget goes up, and we haven't determined what the cost of that will be.
We lose revenue.
We'll lose revenue.
Safe to say that I don't see that happening. Yeah. I don't think any one of us, any one of the three districts finds the notion of keeping it as is to be an option because of the impact, so we'll move forward with it.
My question is sort of related to Lori, like what's the long-term budget implication or cost to us if we don't do this? If we don't take it on? Is that-
If it were to stay the way that it is and those.
Or it goes
how much
someplace
revenue do
else,
we
is it
lose?
gonna cause our budgets to go up? Is it gonna cost us more money long-term?
I'm thinking that we are committed, we being the Addison County School Districts are committed to finding a location for this so that our reimbursements are not affected. And it's my understanding, and Kara can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're committed to this collaborative agreement regardless of where it ends up. I mean, it could have been different than that. It could have been that one of us decides to take it on and then charge tuition elsewhere. And because we've been running this more collaboratively, we didn't explore that option. So I think we're fairly committed to moving this forward as a collaborative agreement across the three regions, no matter, three districts, no matter.
Right. And it doesn't really affect the amount of your expenditures because we're already kind of doing it. It's, but what it does do is it reduces the amount of revenue you receive. So in turn, it increases your per pupil spending, your tax rate, regardless of whether the expenditures stay flat.
Okay. And we could gain revenue from it down the road.
Right.
Okay. Mark?
We're talking about a specific program right here, but there are other alternative programs that are potentially housed there as well. This is one of the ones, right.
The counties have been or the districts and the county have been in conversation about how do you grow this to support our other needs, because there's other needs, K through 5 in the county, and how could we grow this over a 2 or 3 year plan to meet other needs that we have that are currently very expensive to outsource.
I guess I have two questions. I was hoping you could speak to why, I've heard from a couple of community members, why can this not be folded into an existing building? Like, why could the program not be housed here at the high school? Is there a specific reason why, do we not have the space for it here? Is it not appropriate to dovetail it into this building somehow?
Well, I think that it with, by moving other things that are already here, you know, specifically, and I would think the A wing would be an appropriate spot, so that's the downstairs part of the building, but it does involve moving the things that are down there to make space for it, so it's like anything else. And I think at the point we make that decision to move it here, we are reducing our flexibility in the future for however else we might also want to use this building, you know, with the middle school or whatever future conversations we're going to have about this facility and its use. So, you know, we can bring them here. I think that they are most appropriately placed here because that's the age of the students. So, you know, I think these are students that would do best by being with other kids their own age. I don't think it would be appropriate to try to share Addison to accommodate this program, because there's just not enough separation between the programs. Like, it needs to be its own distinct program and option for students. So that's why the A wing would be really appropriate, because it has its own entrance, it has its own.
Associated with moving it into this building then?
There would be some costs associated with moving it into the building, because there are other things in that space. They're not necessarily set up for classroom use downstairs. We haven't really talked about what that costs would be, or what, we haven't talked about that, so I wouldn't be able to guess what those changes would be. It would be minimal, because there are students using that space now, and we'd be just talking about different students using that space.
But I think the board wants to be looking long-term. If you have talked about moving 5th and 6th grade at some point in time, if that happens, that space then is not an option, and where would we then house this program? If you want to expand this program, or the county does in the coming years, to a K through 5, I don't recommend putting K through 5th graders in this building. So just some long-term phase planning around building use would be appropriate.
A little bit may have covered it before, but I'm just gonna throw it out there, and you can slot it down thoroughly. If another district within the county did house this program instead of us, how would we fare under that, under that scenario compared to if we did bring it on?
I think for the current budget situation, it would fare pretty much equally, because we would we would be, paying the same costs, except for we're not providing the space. We would reduce potentially two things. The income that we have in this contract also incorporates the fact that these other two districts are paying us a certain amount for the infrastructure, for providing the building. So there's a piece of it that becomes revenue to us by housing it. And we have the building anyway, so we're paying those costs anyway. The second piece is you limit your ability to expand the program and possibly have other school districts eventually tuition students into our program, therefore giving you more revenue in the future. So in this particular scenario, the only thing you'd be losing by doing that would be the amount we were going to charge for the infrastructure, for the space to those other districts in this agreement.
Okay, thank you.
So you mentioned that the per pupil cost is going to go up as a result of this, which means that the state is going to ding us on that side too, right?
Well, it's basically all in the formula. So if your revenue, your local revenues, special ed funding goes down because you can't get reimbursed for a certain item, that automatically changes the formula and means you have to get more of that money from the education fund. That's basically what it's doing. It's just shifting. It's basically saying you're going to get less revenue locally. If you look at this little tax chart as an example, the second line says minus local revenue.
Mm-hmm.
That's where your special ed funding is embedded in there. So when that number goes down, then your number 2 spaces down under education funding, that number has to go up. If your expenditures remain constant, but your local revenues go down, then what happens is your education funding has to increase to cover that. That increased number divided by your equalized pupils, that's determining your threshold and your tax rate.
Revenue is just the amount the state gives us back, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
after they take their cut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Would it be helpful to go over these numbers on this? Because we haven't really talked about the numbers associated. We talked about the positions that would be eliminated under this model. We talked about the fact that the alternative school would be potentially placed in this location, but we didn't talk about the numbers. Would it be
Right.
helpful just to go over that?
You mean
Do you
this
want
sheet
us to
right
finish
here?
the questions first?
Whatever you think, yeah,
Okay.
sure. There's more questions.
One of them is probably a now question. The other one's probably a little bit later, but the first one is, let me ask the later question. At some point in all of this, I'd like to know what the plans are for central office staff under any of these scenarios at the district office. But for more relevant to this, have we had any ability to reach out to the individuals who would be served by this alternative school and their families to see, are they happy with the idea of potentially moving from where they are now to Addison if we went with this model? Like, any idea how they feel about it?
We never talked directly to the families because we didn't want to put out a hypothetical. I mean,
Sure.
a lot of these students have traumatic backgrounds,
Yeah.
so throwing out more options is not overly sometimes helpful till we can give a nice definitive plan of what we're going to be doing.
Yeah. I get that. If there's a way to do it respectfully and even respecting their privacy, if there's any way, I think, I feel like it would, out of respect for them to at least, before we make a decision, at least have some sense, but I understand the difficulty in getting that.
They read the newspaper, like,
Yeah.
they know what's going on in the media. I work with the teachers that
Right.
are down there. I mean, they know, the students and the staff know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's more just, we'd like a decision and to move forward.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
They can't stay where it is, so.
So they're very aware that this was temporary till the end of this year, and they would
Okay.
just like to know where are we gonna be, what's it gonna look like, and who are our teachers
They
gonna
want
be.
the stability. I mean, yeah, if there's any sense for like, are they wildly satisfied with where they are now and they would be very disappointed to have to move? I mean, if there's any way to gauge the temperature.
That's the point. They can't stay where
Yeah, yeah.
whether they're moving here or somewhere
I guess you're right.
else,
It's
they're
not like,
losing.
it's not like we can give,
Right.
yeah, okay, fair enough.
If we didn't take it on, I mean, is either Mount Aber, Middlebury chomping at the bit, or they're agnostic, or, I mean, are they trying to wrestle us for it, or what?
Feelings about
Just
it.
curious.
I think Mount Airy would willingly take it on. They're already hosting a satellite campus for SD Associates out of Williston and doing a phenomenal job. I don't think Middlebury is overly enthusiastic about doing it, but as you guys know, they're having some change in leadership. They have a principal retiring, so it's probably a lot for them to take on.
Okay, so I'd like to go back a little bit to where we are here now and ask a few questions about some of the cuts that have already been made. So, all right, I read the newspaper and I saw all of the explanation of the changes. Thank you, okay? So my general understanding is that we've already made 4 cuts to teach, 4 cuts at the special education level. We made a cut at central office, right? We have, we received some good news in the sense that the state's going to reimburse us like all of the things that you're talking about now, that we thought were going to happen this year.
In special ed.
We learned about those things basically around November 5th or 13th, that those were going to be pushed off to the next year. So one of the other cuts that was in there was increases and decreases in discretionary lines, right? A lot of one-time cuts by administrators and departments. What are we talking about here? Like, how much money? I mean, are we basically just, what I want to know is how much money have our staff said, okay, we can deal with it like one time right now, but it's going to show up next year because we're going to need books, we're going to need computers, we're going to need all of these kinds of things. And that's going to lead us on to this another question about deferred maintenance. Like, what are we? How much money are we talking about here? That got us to this cut to this budget right now? Because I mean, I just think.
Wait, to get to which budget?
To the budget where the do nothing right now.
Is there any deferred maintenance in the option D, the do nothing budget?
Not deferred maintenance, no.
No.
And I think that we'll get into that other part of your question, John, too, when we talk about the below the threshold
Yeah, we're only
budget,
at A right
because
now.
there's more of that discretionary one-time piece. And I don't know the amount of this original.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I want to say it was 15.
Well, this one, that's the fire alarm system, that's not that.
No,
He's
I know.
talking
I
about this
know.
right here.
I thought that was 15, but maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I want to
what the
make sure that
dollar amount was.
everyone has all their questions and full understanding of option A, the ACS repurpose. And you had a question on that?
I do. There's only 1 penny in the tax rate difference between the two.
Which two?
So,
Which two?
between,
Between the ACS repurpose and the below threshold.
right.
Yep, approximately, yep.
There must be, there's a lot of things that are the same there, obviously.
Revenue
What-
changes some.
What is the better outcome for education between those two? Because when we're talking 13 cents, 13 cents is a big thing. But when we're talking a penny, we definitely should err on the side of quality education.
So are people ready then to move on to option B and hear about what the cuts are?
I'm not.
Okay.
I could.
All right,
So
we're
I
going to move
know-
on to that question for a second.
I know last time, when we got the do-nothing budget, we got a summary of all the changes, and I thought I saw it in email, the summary of the changes that are in here.
If you go in the superintendent's report, I think.
It's in the superintendent.
It's in the superintendent's report?
It was done with a different format because we were planning that budget summary that you got last time. Basically, we would have had to walk it in 2 different directions for the 2 different versions. So in theory, we wouldn't update that until we know which direction we're headed in. But we do have information in Sheila's report that gives the list of
Okay,
changes.
thank you.
So right, it is the subject of the superintendent's report. You don't have to click any links. She talks about.
Here it is, I got it,
Requested
thank you.
2 additional
Got it.
budgets.
And
Thank
just
you.
to kind of throw this out, I don't know, it doesn't necessarily, it pertains to all of these budget versions, but the number that I feel that is still, well, first of all, the threshold, that could change again. Just because they put out an estimate doesn't mean it doesn't change. Typically, that number's not likely to change, but I don't want to say that it's not going to. The yield number that they put out as an estimate, that can still change. The legislature is still meeting and talking, and they can change that number. Their estimate is their estimate, and it doesn't have to stay the same. The third thing is, I'm highly suspect of the equalized pupil number. I'm very concerned that that number, from my estimate, is gonna be lower.
Yeah.
When it actually comes out from the state. I have I have a suspicion that it'll be lower. I don't know how by much, you know, I don't know how to evaluate how much lower it will be, so I haven't tried to extrapolate what that would be. You know, any moment now, they could come out with what their preliminary number is, and it's better to probably wait for the state to give us that number, but I'm very concerned that it will be worse than this, and so in any scenario, and I think Sheila and I talked about this earlier, is that we want to look for a model from the board, not necessarily, oh, this is our dollar amount, because it is going to change.
And then refine.
And then we have to find something else. We have to do something else with it.
Past experience does not predict the future with
Does
regard
not.
to equalized pupils, is that correct?
That
True.
number kept changing
Okay.
even after.
Yeah,
Thank-
the
thank
idea
you.
that it keeps
So-
changing.
Except for that
So-
last year may have been the anomaly. I mean, last year was, I think, a little bit worse than it ever could be. Because last year they were using new software and a new collection model to collect all the data. And so our school districts, not us specifically, but everyone, was having trouble getting the data. And so therefore the state was having difficulty sorting out the data, getting it ready, and giving us a number. And so the number kept changing for that reason also. And the more districts that submit their data, the base of their calculation changes. So it's not just our numbers that matter specifically, it's the whole aggregate of the state of Vermont has to be evaluated and have all the data in before you get a real number. So last year, I feel like the number changing as much as it did through the whole process and even after we voted on our budget is not normal. For instance, we were able to get all of our data in this year on time without any problems, and they've responded and given us feedback for changes, and we've already dealt with that. So it seems like the system is working better. But then again, as you were sharing earlier, the Agency of Education is short-staffed. And so that's going to play a factor in the timing of when we are able to get the data back from them, just because they don't have the manpower to be able to get us the data.
So, since we just are looking at the superintendent's report, maybe I should read through some of this so that it's all. So this budget that we're talking about right now.
Are we on B?
A.
We're still
We
on
haven't
A.
moved on yet.
Sorry.
Decreases expenses overall by $695,080 and is approximately $197,400 below the threshold. This option will have the smallest tax increase for our taxpayers. This plan includes the following changes: elimination of 9 professional staff, elimination of 1 administrator, elimination of 1 admin assistant, reduction of food service, reduction of 0.5 FTE custodian, and repurposes space for shared alternative school. The second budget, B, includes the following changes as agreed upon by the administrative team and is estimated to bring the budget below the spending threshold. The changes in the budget B, the below the threshold budget, are elimination of elementary sports programs, elimination of after-school programming not required by our 21C grant, which is FCS, and a reduction of Fusion, elimination of the Virgins Crossing Guard, elimination of the VUHS Director of Guidance position, elimination of .3 VUHS World Language position, elimination of 1 VUES Intervention Services position, elimination of 1 elementary school administrator, reduction of front office reception summer office support, reduction of VUHS field trips and supplies 1 year only, reduction of 1 bus within Virgins, reduction of clinical services provided by CSAC. And then the statement following these summaries says, repurposing Addison Central School is the most efficient model for maintaining the quality of programming within and across the remaining schools and provides much needed space for alternative education. Keeping the Addison Central School in operation as is will be at the expense of the quality of programming elsewhere when these same students can be accommodated at the Virgins Union Elementary School with only 1 additional teacher added. Reducing our budget by repurposing the Addison Central School ensures these costs do not continue to compound and grow, requiring even more painful reductions next year. While none of our options will completely relieve us from the challenges ahead, This budget puts us in a much better position next year as we begin the FY22 budget cycle. The do-nothing budget places an undue burden on our taxpayers across all 5 communities as the resources are stretched to operate only 4 classrooms in the Addison Central School by duplicating services already being offered elsewhere. The below-the-threshold budget will impact the quality of co-curricular offerings and other services provided to students and their families, and increases the workload of the administration, which in turn will impact quality. So that was the summary. So, shall we move on to B? Yes?
Yeah. Can you stack them, can you itemize the expenses of the top 4 of this list of, it looks like 8 or 10? Which are the ones that are the biggest number? You started with the sports programs and you ended with
Oh, for
clinical
the,
services
for budget B,
providers.
which is the largest.
I think it
impact.
would be the admin position and
There's the-
the director of guidance position. And actually, the clinical services by CSAC would be substantial. Those 3 are the largest,
What's the sports-
dollar-wise.
What will be the sports program cost?
That's approximately $15,000.
How about the bus?
The bus is approximately $53,000, one bus for a year.
And what is the plan to pick up the slack from that? What is the accommodation that's being made to make up for that?
Are you talking about the busing?
The bus.
Yeah.
So we talked about that a little bit since publishing this, and I think what we would do, instead of declaring which bus it actually is work with our transportation provider and say we need to eliminate a bus, and that could be done through reducing stops for some other spot, and maybe it's not specifically this one bus, maybe it's rethinking the routes elsewhere, but we just work with them and say, we've got to go down by one more bus and figure that out, so.
Right, rather than saying, it's not necessarily Virgin's bus and everybody from Virgin's will be walking or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that.
That might not be the best bus.
Right.
They may have a more logical solution for us.
Right.
And as a
Yes.
reminder, we were able to do that this year.
Right.
We've already
We've
We've already
reduced
reduced
one
one.
bus.
This would be an additional bus.
Right. George?
I'm having a hard time seeing where if you subtract one thing from another, you get the 695 reduction in expenses.
For this B, option B,
Yeah.
below the threshold?
Which one?
The below the threshold?
Are you talking about the revenue difference?
No, I'm talking about, no, the 695 I thought was the repurpose. Yeah, the repurpose version.
Right, so, right, in the repurposed version, the expenses decreased by $695,000 from the number that you saw in the original do-nothing budget. Expenditures only, that's only talking expenditures. So when you look at the expenditure total on that do-nothing budget that we brought at the last meeting, that number changed, it went down by $695,000. Now, the reason why the overall change in this budget scenario is $667,000 is because there are revenue factors in here, implications and things that change and move around a little bit. So that's why the exact dollar amount between what you needed to find in that budget scenario to be below the threshold and what you now have over and above the threshold is slightly different than $695.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I suppose I had that other sheet.
Here, George.
Let me look.
Go do nothing.
Bill, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure where to put this, but we talked about busing just a minute ago, and so I just want to put this out to see if any other board members feel the same way, and if this can be guidance to the administration. So if we end up repurposing Addison, I feel like we have an obligation to do as much as we can to soften that impact on Addison students, and one of those areas is potentially looking at, I mean, if we're going to, does it make sense for kids who live a half a mile away from Virgin's elementary school who are able-bodied to walk, so that maybe we can add a bus in Addison to even potentially shorten the routes for some of the Addison students? And I'd really like to see, a concerted effort to look at that. I feel like we owe them at least that. It'd be nice if we could actually shorten the average route for the Addison student if we repurpose.
I think the likelihood of that being able to happen increases when we don't have 4 different start times for the bus company to have to navigate around. So at the point now, we're only looking at 3 different school start
Right.
times, or even 2 at some point in the future. We can think about those runs and those routes a lot differently than the way we have to think about them now. So that's, I've already thought of that.
Good.
I think that
Yeah,
that's.
it would be so great if that, yeah. It may feel like little consolation to a
No,
lot of
I
families,
think
but
it's important.
it is a big deal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we could add a bus, then we could likely reduce the amount of time
Right.
the students are spending on the bus.
Right.
Is there some reason why the elementary schools don't start all at the same time?
Well, I mean, some of it is the bus routes and the dropping off of the high school and the picking up and so forth, so I'm not sure, I'm not even gonna talk about start times, because I wouldn't even be the right one to talk about how they got set the way that they did. But it's certainly something we can look at in the future.
Other questions about the below the threshold?
Well, the 3 things that jump out at me with option B here that are in elimination are guidance, intervention, clinical services. And those just seem like bad things to be losing, especially when we're just talking about lockdown and needing to have kids feel safe. And we've heard from students last year when we were talking about security guards, and that we have really good one-on-one, a number of different ways that our students can communicate with each other and have group and have restorative justice and have all these things. And 3 of the positions we want to eliminate or reduce directly impact that, which feels like we're just setting ourselves up for future problems.
Are we moving into talking about the below the threshold budget?
We are,
Because I
yes.
think there are a lot of items on that list that could be maybe qualified a little bit for the board's understanding.
Okay.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, beginning then with the director of guidance position, I think that, many of these changes actually, were put in motion before I started here. So, for example, elementary sports, the after-school programming, and the director of guidance position are all things that this district went about purposefully growing, for the benefit of our students. So this particular, approach to budgeting walks us back from those gains, I think, in these areas. I think specifically with the director of guidance, we're in the 2nd year of that model, so it hasn't, it hasn't reached a stride by any means. It's still growing, but that individual is responsible for the advisory system, which is really important in a proficiency-based learning environment, with personal learning plans and flexible pathways and all of those pieces. The advisory, what we would have thought of in our day as homeroom, plays a much more critical role for these students who are trying to set about creating and fulfilling a personal learning plan. So it's important that we think about, that's a pretty critical need going forward. I think, as Mark already alluded, the social emotional programs, this person in this school is responsible for moving those pieces forward in a lot of ways. I mean, there are a lot of folks here on staff that are committed to these practices, but it's to have an administrator that's equally as committed is a necessary component part of that. I understand that since implementing this model, there has been a more equitable approach to scheduling, so calling out sort of things where students aren't maybe able through scheduling to access certain courses, and those things have been brought forward, and so that the schedule can be adapted so that kids can access things that in the past perhaps they haven't been able to. This position supports some of the neediest students, and also does critical summer tasks. This is a year-round position, and there are a lot of things that happen in the guidance office in the summer, such as scheduling, registration, transcripts, and so forth. And I'm not really sure at this time how those needs would be met. Stephanie, I know there's a lot you might say about this. I don't know if there's anything you would want to add here.
I'm thinking about what I might add, and I would start with the title of that program is not directive guidance. Guidance is an obsolete model. guidance is what we had when we were looking to go to college. They coached for one thing and one thing only, and that was, college and your courses. We've been charged with an immense transformation here in the state of Vermont, and a lot of those responsibilities fall in what we term the Director of School Counseling and Student Programming. So my vision was to expand that office into something that really met the needs of 21st century learners and beyond. And we've had conversations here with many of you about struggles with guidance, and we're looking to improve that. The schools that have made great strides in those areas, the ones that people ask me, why aren't you doing more of this, like such and such school, they have those people in those positions. Our department, as highly skilled as our school counselors are, were without any oversight since Virginia or Dick, and I don't remember who they were, retired, and that was like 17 years ago. We created this position when we had the retirement of essentially a guidance secretary in that office. So, we added it to the list, but I don't see how we're going to do any of that work without someone in that role.
Yeah, I think I can speak to pretty much any of them. I think with the after-school programming, not required by the 21C grant, that is the fusion program at Ferrisburg. And it's some of the summer fusion program here at the high school, so that would take that from 5 days to 4 days and would reduce the site coordinator position during the school year. The total hit to the general fund through after-school programming is about $111,000, so it's about half that we're proposing be cut. So the childcare portion of that at Ferrisburg is self-sustaining. In other words, it's fee for service, and so that portion of it could remain. And we also talked about Ferrisburg students being able to take the bus and participate at Fusion perhaps elsewhere. So that's how we accommodated that.
Sheila, can I just step in with a really quick question on that?
Yep.
The amount that's not funded by a local revenues that come in to pay for that, the after school, that does count toward our per pupil threshold, if I recall, if it's something that we're paying.
The revenue that we generate through childcare?
No, what we're paying that we don't get back in revenue from people participating for Ferrisburg.
For childcare?
For childcare.
Where does that money go? It goes directly to the program.
Yeah, so the child care program is in its own fund.
So it doesn't have any, okay, thank you, I just wanted to make sure.
It's not coming into play with your per pupil. Basically, the fees that parents are paying along with a subsidy from the state of Vermont is paying for that.
Okay, thank you, sorry to slow you down, Sheila.
No, it's fine.
But the fusion funding has a
piece. That 50,000 that you were talking about,
Yeah.
that's, okay, so that piece.
Does,
okay, thank you.
yes.
The intervention service position is not necessarily attributed to VUES. The majority of those positions are here, which is why I listed that, but based on seniority, it's not necessarily a VUES interventionist. But we currently have 5 literacy interventionists across the whole district. That would move that down to 4. In terms of the school administrator, we listed it here. We spent, a few hours talking about this budget proposal. We had spent a few hours on one of those snow days talking about this budget proposal too. This idea of reducing an elementary or a school administrator across the district, we talked a lot about this. It's a struggle. I think that the work of an administrator in an elementary school, particularly a small one, is pretty complex. They wear a lot of hats, and so there are costs in terms of imagining where that slack gets picked up. But we also haven't designed the model, like what it would be specifically. We aren't necessarily saying this person would be the principal of these 2 buildings or something to that effect. So we would want to do some work on this model to figure out sort of the least impactful way to proceed with a reduction of this kind. taking into account that we're also trying to leverage ourselves toward a future where we have a designated middle school. So we may want to consider our needs around middle school in the future as we redesign this option. So we can commit to this reduction, but we need some time to work out the model specifically. And you're not necessarily approving the model, you're approving the notion. So I guess I just wanted to say that about that position. You had your hand
Do you want me to hold until all of these and ask questions? I don't want to slow down your rhythm here.
No, I mean, it's up to you. How do
Okay,
you wanna
just
ask
a really
about
quick
that?
one. Is there a contractual, like a labor contract prohibition against having a principal also serve as a teacher, or, you know, some kind of like a headmaster model from back in the old school days? Is
No.
that something that you've?
No, there's teaching principals in
Okay.
other small schools.
So that's a model that it's at least under consideration if,
We did not consider that. That's not what we're proposing here.
Okay.
We're not proposing a teaching principal here.
Okay,
I
yeah,
mean, the
you can-
licensing component of that is the person would have to have the license to do both of those jobs. And most school administrators retained their teaching certifications, so
Okay.
most school administrators could be teachers. It depends what they taught. You know,
Right.
there are former high school teachers that are now elementary school principals. So they're
Okay.
not licensed to teach elementary school, they're licensed to teach high school.
got it,
If
I
that
understand.
makes sense, so.
Yeah.
And likewise, teachers don't necessarily have administrative certification, and in order to supervise and evaluate other employees, they have to
You have
have
to
a
have that.
supervisor's license or an administrator's license. So
Okay.
those are the parameters around how that works. So you
Okay.
have to, in Vermont, be licensed to do the job that you do. Make sense? Yes. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I don't know where to go with it as far as like, you know, is that a good model if we were to keep Addison intact the way it is, to go with that model? But it sounds like you're already looking at that, and I don't want to pretend to be an expert on how
Yep.
administration should look for a school, because I'm not. So thank you for explaining it.
Yep. The reduction of summer office support comes again sort of in the context of as central office has assumed more of the budget control, I guess you could say, of the schools, as that sort of shifted, and we're not four distinct entities, but rather one entity. Purchasing has shifted over to the central office, so as part of that, the office support in the buildings is doing less with purchasing than they ever have in the past, so we feel like that is a change that could be easily accommodated. It's not a huge amount of money, unfortunately, but it's a little, something. The VUHS field trips and supplies, again, this is a 1 year only. That would largely impact the middle school field trips for next year. And it's not something we could, we're really worried that by putting this kind of thing out there, it's gonna be really, really hard to get it back in another year. But I think we could all agree that we don't want to eliminate field trips for our students in forever. But for 1 year, to help make this bottom line, I think this was something that we offered up as an option.
Do you know roughly what that amount comes to? Or a total of what would be?
We reduced
a 1
$15,000
year?
from the budget. How much of that's field trip versus supplies? I
No,
don't
no,
know.
but the 1 year only is about that
About
much.
15,000.
Okay.
And then in terms of reducing the clinical services provided through CSAC, we're trying to, we would be accommodating those needs through our school counseling at the elementary level to kind of help make up the difference. So we're not just saying, oh, well, and, your needs will go unmet. We're thinking about how we'll meet those needs, as we are with this whole list, right? Like, how will we meet those needs in other ways? And that's where it kind of gets to my point of, how long can you continue to kind of pick up the pieces here before it, qualitatively you start feeling that as community members, as parents, and as students. We tried to, not go straight for programs, right? So we're trying to reduce where we can before we get to that program level, but these will, over time, have qualitative impacts.
What's the point for reduction for world language?
So again, we're not committing necessarily to how that will work. We right now have 2.3 world language teachers. So we're proposing that we would eliminate .3. We have a German teacher, and we have a Spanish teacher, and we have a French teacher. And our French and Spanish teachers can teach either of those languages. So we would figure out through scheduling exactly how, whether we would continue to accommodate students that are in the French program and no longer offer that for freshmen, but let kids that are currently enrolled finish out. We haven't really talked about how exactly we will implement that. We're just trying to get to the budget number first.
Other questions on this option? Yes.
So just in the you stated pretty clearly that we're about $200,000 below the threshold. I didn't see with B, it's a little bit, I mean, I know we're not talking about a whole lot, but it's a little bit more, 80,000.
80,000.
Above the penalty.
Yeah, so, well, below.
Below the penalty. Okay, so let's.
And this is assuming your per pupil stay at my estimate.
That was my next question. Let's say we go to 950.
Yeah, we'd be looking for some more cuts.
We'd be looking for more cuts.
Yes.
Okay, if we went to 950 which is not an unreasonable amount. Last year we were kind of wavering. There were like
Right.
20 student swings basically.
Right.
And I get, let's pretend it's gonna be more stable, but it's gonna change in one way or another.
Right,
If we go to 950 with, A budget with the 197, 395 currently below threshold, what would we still be under, at 950, would we still be under the threshold, or would we?
My estimate would be that you would probably be right about at break even possibly, and potentially maybe looking for something slight to cut.
So definitely more wiggle room.
Right.
Right.
So in other words, this is like 10 equalized.
So, oh, Mark, go ahead.
Ish, yeah.
Just a question or
Yeah,
comment.
which makes
So
sense. Yeah.
in below,
Yeah.
option B, whatever it's on,
Mhm.
we have some stuff that's 1 year. Is there anything in the A that's a 1 year reduction, or are those all
There
set,
are
and so
some,
we're not gonna have
well,
to come back to it later?
let's remember that when we started all of this, we started with the do-nothing version where we were looking for 470,000. Within that budget version, we already had some one-time cuts, decreases to discretionary spending that, John mentioned in that first version where the administrators got together and came up with some suggestions as to where they could cut to try to get from the 955 to the 470, basically.
But none of the bullets here
And so there are some of
are any
those.
of these in Sheila's?
No,
No,
Those are all.
no.
And do you know the amount of what was the 1 year
That's
total from the do-nothing?
like the ones that are.
From the
Well, they're
rendering.
saying how much was this right
Right.
here. Yeah, I don't have it.
You don't have it,
Things that
okay.
might need to go back in.
And then one of the things that's
Yeah.
just jumped out at me, I've known that we had 60 students at Addison and that we have combined classes, but until I read, we have 4 classrooms in the building. I really hadn't thought about that logistics. There's a building that there's 4 classrooms being used, and that's for ages 5 through 12 are in 4 rooms. And I just hadn't conceptualized it in that way before.
Mhm.
They really can't get any smaller without those groupings getting really wonky, if you know what I mean. So there's a K1, currently, there's a K1, a 1-2, a 3-4, and a 5-6 classroom. That's it. And this year was the first year that first grade was split between 2 classrooms. So in the past, kindergarten has been a standalone, and first and second grade has been a group, third and fourth grade and fifth and sixth grade has been a group.
Isn't that preferred, to have kindergarten as
Standalone, I think,
separate? I mean, I know everything can be done,
preferred,
but-
right. I don't think it's ideal to have first grade in 2 different configurations. I think they're making it work, as of course they would. But I'm not sure that's necessarily easy.
And with those 4 classes, if I recall correctly, when we looked at the class size policy, next year, the 5, 6 would still, even combined, would be below.
Right, I think there's about
the
6
minimum.
kids in each of those grades, so there'll be like 12 kids in the combined class, if I'm right. Is that about right? 4th grade, 5 kids, 6 kids, 6, yeah, it's about right.
I have the numbers in front of me, so 4th grade this year is 6, and 5th grade this year is 5, so next year it'd be
Thank you.
11 total
Thank
for
you,
5 and
Alden.
6.
Thank you, all. You're really good
Unprepared.
researcher.
You've had really great teachers.
Other questions on any of the budget models? I want to make sure everyone understands what we're looking at. So we do have an action item later on to give direction to the administration. I believe what they are looking for is someone at that point to make a motion to further explore one of these models to be further refined through January, leading up to budget adoption on the 22nd.
Okay.
Good. Okay. That brings.
Will we continue to have conversation?
Right now?
At that moment, like,
Oh,
when
when-
someone makes a proposal.
When someone makes a motion, then it's open for discussion, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, so that brings us to the student report.
Lightning round. It's pretty recent since we did the last one, so we don't have too much. Main things are, we had a lockdown, everything was fine. From what I've heard, not everyone was okay, because it was like a pretty stressful, pretty scary situation. But the response from the staff in the school was wonderful. And I think that everyone did the best they could in a stressful situation. Moving on from that, this past Saturday, the John Grant Shelter held their sleep out for the homeless. And I don't know exactly how many Virginia students were there. It was more than 10 and more than any of the other local high schools, so we're pretty cool. Also, 6 Walden students and a Walden teacher went to the Youth Climate Leadership Academy. I was also there, and we are in the process of developing a plan to encourage students to carpool and so to reduce carbon emissions. And that was a cool thing, so expect to hear about that soon.
I am concerned that the teachers have not been given the time to write learning scales for their classes, and this has affected the consistency in grading our work, and students feel that the lack of learning scales has led them to not know what the teacher is expecting out of the assessments. So, just wanted to bring that up.
Okay. I'm not sure the board can necessarily help with that. Have you talked to the administration, or have there been some meetings about this with the administration? Or, I guess I would say that might be a more productive avenue. Thank you, yeah. Anything else? Oh, great, thank you. Okay, board reports. Oh.
We have a joint, the area curriculum directors, CVED, and the CVSA, the superintendents. We have a joint meeting. We do this once or twice a year, coming up this Friday. And the focus is on personalized learning and moving equity forward into Vermont schools. And we've been planning this meeting for a while. And initially, because of a variety of challenges, we didn't think that we were going to have a student rep, because we didn't have a student rep participate in the training for the as it turns out, the training was on a snow day, so nobody had a student participate in the training. So we decided to go back at this idea that we really should be bringing a student with us to this training, and in the 11th hour, we asked Alder if he would come, and it's my understanding that he has once again offered to represent us.
It wasn't the 11th hour. I asked for this morning, and the
This
meeting is
morning,
Friday.
excuse me. So, but I just want to say this is similarly earlier in the school year. The School Boards Association reached out and wondered if any students would be willing to come and serve on a panel to share what it's like to be a student rep on a school board. And Alder was kind enough to come and serve on a panel for that, and to the benefit of many school board chairs and superintendents around the state. So I just want to thank Alder for saying yes when we ask him to step up and do things.
I'm sure my German teacher does not agree with you there.
Yes, well, we're very grateful, so.
All right, Hannaford, anything from you?
I just want to step in real quick. We've got a PBL meeting tomorrow night. Did that get mentioned?
Not yet.
I just wondered if that might be something we could find out.
Sure, Violet's has handouts, actually.
Hi, everyone. I did leave some handouts by the door. Please take them. I've also emailed the info. Feel free to shoot me a message if you have any specific questions. But the high school leadership team is really doing a lot of work around deepening the understanding of proficiency-based learning and teaching among students, educators, parents, community. So one of the steps we're taking is having a continued conversation. It's tomorrow night here, 6 to 8. That info's on the flyer as well. Mike McGrath, who's the Assistant Executive Director for the VPA, is going to be coming back once again. For those of you who joined us last year, he started that conversation. This year, he's no longer working in the capacity of a building principal, but he's working for the VPA, so he's got kind of a unique lens in that he can offer us a perspective about happenings from around the state. And like I said, it's one of several events that we're working on so that we can continue to improve the processes in our systems. And I should mention also, this is something that we're encouraging all folks to come to, pre-K-12. I just want to be really clear that it's not just a 7 to 12 initiative, that we're really, as a whole system, having conversations about proficiency-based teaching and learning, or student-centered learning.
And VPA is Vermont Principals Association.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes. Too many acronyms always. Vermont Principals Association.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So 6 to 8 tomorrow? Here. All right, Hanford, anything happening in Hanford?
Yeah, I thought I would share a few things. Actually, the school board meeting is this coming Wednesday, but I looked over all my documentation today and thought I'd share a couple things that are going on. The Virgin's 10th graders went there last Friday. They were supposed to go there, at least that's what it said, so they got to tour the center. You brought up Governor Scott doing his Addison County tour, and the governor with the secretary of the Ag Secretary and Ag Deputy Secretary visited the center when they were doing that tour. They visited with the natural resource students, and those students have, the center got a $10,000 grant from MIT because there's a student that developed maple sugar industry SAP flow meter, and they have a provisional patent pending, so they took a look at that when they were there. The Sustainable Ag students recently processed 91 guinea fowl hens with their portable mobile poultry processing trailer, so I thought that was kind of cool. They did and stress that it was in a humane way. I just wanted to throw that out there. And ART, the Addison Repertory Theater, is putting on their performance this coming weekend. Oh. Adrian is the name of the production, and it's this December 13th and 14th. There you go.
Going on there.
There is a lot going on there,
A lot
for
of
sure.
opportunities.
So I just want to, I got the newsletter, which I was thrilled to see, and I clicked on it, and I got an error saying it was not a safe website to go
Uh-oh.
to.
Well,
And I replied to the email, hoping that
Okay.
the person would know that, but I wanted to let you
I'll
know
bring it
that.
up
I
on
didn't click
Wednesday.
on it. I imagine it's probably fine,
Okay.
but it's still,
It's probably just your server. I'm pretty sure I clicked on it, nothing happened.
and nothing happened?
If they use a third party.
So I'm using
Yeah.
Chrome.
Yeah.
That's what I
it
figured, yeah.
sometimes identifies as.
And I do recall you're getting that newsletter link, but
Yes.
in case you don't read it.
Yeah. So,
Just give
okay,
us mine.
Thank you.
thank you.
All right. So I just have put the grievance determination in here. We met last month for a grievance, and that is just the written finding from that. So that's all I have. Facilities?
So, I have I did not have a chance to write this out before today. I will give this to Glory or send her an email of this after but I just want to read it because there are a couple things that I wanted to go through. Because at our last meeting on Friday, we talked about a number of issues that I think are important. First, the Facilities Committee has on its agenda a long-term facilities plan, which is part of the board's strategic work plan. Our hope from last spring was that we would have a draft of this by late fall. Questions around the reorganization of the schools have intervened, and this is currently being pushed back. This is not all negative. Ken Sullivan is currently enrolled in a class in which he's learning how to use a tool from the Institutional Facilities Management Association. Is that right, Ken? Which is where he's learning to use a much better tool than he has had access to. So I think this is a good thing that it's actually taking us a little bit longer, but I wanted to assure the board as a whole that this remains something that we're paying attention to and that we haven't lost sight of, that we actually would like to accomplish. Second, regarding the ongoing issues at FCS with drainage and mold, the most recent test by KD Associates was positive in that there was no change in the situation. Right, so they, it's all good, or it's all the same, which is the important part.
No unhealthy findings.
No unhealthy
Okay.
findings, thanks. The committee discussed whether or not it was time to submit a request for proposals for a design to mitigate the water problems at FCS. We were unable to come to a conclusion, but one of the issues that we face is financial. A design for mitigation will cost more than is in the maintenance budget. Indeed, testing is now currently more than is in the maintenance budget. And so the committee is considering whether it would be appropriate to ask the board to use some of the long-term capital funds to pay for a design for mitigation. We on the committee had some questions that we were not able to answer about the procedures for making this recommendation, because the board has never made a recommendation. I mean, the committee's, we've never used the money. We have not yet used the money.
There is a policy, I believe.
Oh, I think you might.
I think there's a policy.
There's a procedure.
It's a procedure.
There's
Sorry,
a
there's a procedure.
procedure, there's no policy, there's just a
Okay.
procedure,
There's
and
a
we've never
procedure.
formalized the procedure.
Oh, I thought it went through,
It was
oh,
in
it's still a
draft
draft, okay.
I'm the one who has the draft though, right?
It's on the, it's in the drive.
Oh, it's in the drive?
Yeah, I looked it up.
Oh,
Went through the
okay.
finance committee.
Yeah.
We worked on it at some point in the finance committee.
Yes.
Like,
You
we
did.
talked about it, we
Got
worked
it,
on it.
got it, okay.
But where it stopped, I don't think it ever officially became like the.
So we tabled the discussion. And we will return to this in January. Third, the committee considered the issue of the central office and whether we believe the administration should be moving to a new space. This is coming up because our lease at the Kennedy Brothers is up. And this is a contentious issue because there have been many comments and questions over the last several months of discussion about reorganization, that the administration of the school district costs too much. I generally disagree with these statements. This is just slightly different issue. Institutions require administrators to achieve their missions. Schools do not run well without good principals, and districts do not run well without good superintendent and other people such as directors of learning, learning and curriculum, and business managers. Administrations can be bloated, but this is not what I see here. I see people who are doing essential jobs to provide the conditions necessary for our students to learn effectively. The committee agrees in principle to the idea that the central office should move into one of the buildings currently owned and run by the district. However, we also believe it does not make sense to ask the central office to move right now. There are several issues that go into this recommendation. First, as we go through reorganization, it remains unclear what spaces are going to be available for the central office to move into. It is worth noting the central office can't be in just any space. We can't just move the office willy-nilly into the corners of the high school library, like right over there, for example. It has to have a space with a separate entrance and a conference space. It requires parking and sufficient telephone and internet services. We require separate entrances because visitors to offices for routine business have not necessarily been through background checks, unlike the staff who work at central office. Second, and this is really important, the costs of moving central office are not negligible. In fact, they can be quite substantial. Space in one of the 4 schools will need ultimately to be reconfigured to account for the needs of the central office. Which building the central office moves to will of course affect those costs. There are a couple different spaces, one of which is the A wing that we talked about earlier. There's a trailer that is attached to Addison. There might become space at Ferrisburg. I mean, there are spaces, but depending on which space we choose, the costs are of the reconfiguration are going to vary. It is not impossible that this will cost upwards of $200,000 to arrange an available space. Kennedy Brothers apparently spent $275,000 when the supervisory union offices moved in 5 or 6 years ago, 5 years ago. Jeff Glassberg, who's a member of the facilities committee and a developer, put together a rough budget for us and suggested that it is not, again, it's not unreasonable to think that it could cost us $200,000 to move, to reconfigure one of the spaces for the central office. In the long run, this is obviously the smart thing to do. Even if we spend $200,000, in 4 to 5 years, we'll have spent the same amount that we would on leasing offices, and we would no longer owe on it. However, the financial costs, and this does not include the human costs of moving, which are substantial, are such that we think it makes little sense to move the office right now while we don't know what the best place to put it is, where we don't know where a long-term solution might be. Just as the middle school teachers asked us to push back our plans to move the 5 and/or 6 to VUHS in order to ensure proper planning, the committee suggested that we wait and seek a 2-year lease. Kennedy Brothers was going to charge us I believe a 14% increase for a 1-year extension. Recognizing our situation, they seemed to be open to reducing this over a 2-year lease and offered the superintendent, I believe, and this is not in writing, this was a conversation that was then she then shared with us, a 5% increase in year 1 and a 2% increase for subsequent years. This would put us approximately at about $60,000 for each year. Again, we in the committee recognize that some members of our 5 towns will disagree with our conclusions, and I have to be honest, this is not what I was expecting. This was not what I was looking for. I was expecting to suggest that we move to one of the buildings. However, we feel that we will be better served by making the programmatic decisions first and the space ones second. We will be spending less money over the next 2 years by remaining in Kennedy Brothers than we will if we try to move right now. So.
Okay. Thanks for doing
Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys doing that. I'm not on that committee, and so what I'm saying comes with a lot of respect and also a lot of ignorance because I'm not on that committee. But like maybe some of you on the committee, I'm really disappointed to hear that. I think speaking with people in our community, they've been very clear about their concern about the costs of renting space for the district office. We were, for many months, looking at a scenario that would have moved middle school up and reconfigured the way a whole bunch of kids were moving around. We were perfectly happy then to say, well, don't worry, the plans will emerge after we make the decision. You know, we have to trust the process. The plans will come after the decision. And, you know, here it feels like now we're saying, well, we don't want to do that for the district office. And so it doesn't feel right to me. I'm really, I don't know, I'm disappointed, but let me also just come back to saying that, you know, I apologize if I'm saying something out of ignorance because I'm not on that committee, and I respect and appreciate what your committee did. So those are my comments.
I guess I would say yes. And that's why one of the things I said is the middle school teachers asked us to push it back, and they made a good, you know, I think they made a reasonable case about why it makes sense to do this over 2 years. When we were looking at the costs, the costs to moving are substantial, and we don't want, and it doesn't make sense to move people twice. It doesn't make sense to reconfigure something here for you know, $75,000, $80,000, $90,000, whatever it is. And each of the places that we would be talking about would require reconfiguration. And then, you know, let's say we move the central office downstairs, but then we decide, wait, we can't do for July 1, but then we decide, but we really need that space for the middle school. Or we need that space because the middle school is going here, and those things that are here are going to go there. So I think that the same, in the short term, it's going to cost us less money to stay where we are for 2 years, I believe, than it is for us to move. Yeah, George.
If I may, I was against the idea of moving the central office into the present location when it happened, as there was space within the school. However, it's there. And everything that Tom is saying resonates. There's a cost to the personnel and to the process that they are engaged in when you have them stop what you're doing, pack it up, move it, unpack it, try and figure out where you were, and this whole process is going to be right at the end of our budget year when they're trying to do end-of-year reports. This is something that is not going to have a positive effect on the process. And as much as I am unhappy with renting space at this point in time, I think that we are much better off doing that and waiting until we have a solid location. So when that office moves, that's where it's going to stay. We won't then be looking at another move in a couple of years with additional cost and an additional disruption to all of those people's work.
Questions, comments on the facilities?
I think I'd be more in agreement with Bill if we were moving the middle school. And I was kind of clear last time we met that I was pretty annoyed that we were going to kick that can down the road once again, and we're going to do the same thing with central office, but we don't know where anything is. So we don't know if 6 is going to move, 5 and 6 is going to move, where they're going to move, how they're going to move. Now we have the mix of the alternative school, if it's going to come in, where it's going to come, where it's going to go. And all of that means central office has to kind of take a step back and say, okay, as soon as space opens up and I know it's going to stay there, that's where I can go. But there's too many pieces that we don't have an answer to, and we don't know where it's going to go. And I would love to say, okay, we're moving middle school over, but we've decided we'll push that off. And if we were doing that, then we would know at least some of the space is now definitely open. But we don't know that. So I think it probably makes sense to leave it, much as much really don't want to kick that can down the road anymore either. But that's where we are.
Anything else?
I will add to just what Mark said about the whole middle school. I mean, I think they want to be very thoughtful about the planning process for the middle school, and if we were to move the central office in a location in the high school, then that could prevent, you know, the best possible solution for the middle school. And I think that's more important, personally, to get that completely right and let a big group of people work on that over the next year and, you know, bide our time with the central office. It's not ideal, but I think it's the most prudent solution moving forward, so we can make sure we get all these moves right and all the people in the right places.
Is there a reason why the committee is recommending 2 years rather than making the move, say, at the end of the next school year?
There were two things that were going on. The first was that we thought that they would be more likely to get a better rate from Kennedy Brothers than the 14% increase.
And we did.
And the second thing is that I'm not sure that everything's going to be ready by the end of next year, by the end of next academic year. So, you know, July. I don't think we are going to be settled as a district. I think this is going to be a couple-year process. And I've said this before, and it came back to bite me at one of the meetings. But yeah, George.
Does it also offer a little flexibility, perhaps, in not moving right at the end of the fiscal year? In other words, if we have a 2-year window, they could move in a year and a half or a year and 3/4 or something to that effect. If that's easier.
Just speaking very candidly, I think there's a detriment to cutting administration too much, and I think we all agree on that. I do think that if we are asking or pushing forward something as dramatic as reconfiguration of schools, that we need to be able to seriously look at where admin can also take a hit here. I don't want to make it sound like an act of pain here, but it needs to be felt across the board. If schools can close and run more efficiently by combining in the way that we're asking to, I think we have to be willing to look at where that can happen and where it can happen sooner rather than later. If a deferment is needed for very logistical reasons of needing to figure out what space is available, I can get behind that. But I'm finding it harder to get behind the concept of not finding ways that we can spread some of these cuts into admin as well. And I know that there are some presented here, some more palatable than others, but yeah, that's it.
Anything else on the facilities? Okay, negotiations, do we have?
Mark, can
Update?
you were there, I wasn't.
Meeting with the staff, we've met with the staff last week, we're meeting with again tomorrow, and we will be meeting with the teachers in early January.
All right, moving on to action items.
I move that we approve the minutes of November 18th, 2019.
Second.
Any comments, changes on the minutes? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, bills and directors' orders.
I move that we approve the bills and directors' orders, accept them for the amount of accounts payables of $745,559.25. Payroll of $1,202,336.50. And student accounts of $22,394.39.
Second.
Okay, and this brings us current on all of the bills and directors' orders? Yes? Okay. All right, any comments, anything, things look okay? All right, all, okay. All in favor of accepting those, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay, the motion passes. Approved tuition, announced tuition for FY '21.
So the calculated amount for kindergarten through elementary grades is $17,030. And the secondary, which is 7 through 12 grades, is $17,508.
I'm sorry, say that one more time. 1730?
Yep, 17,030.
Yep.
And 17,508.
508.
I move that we approve the tuition that Director Jennings has just told us.
Second.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that?
Where are those set? Sorry.
Where are they?
How are those determined?
How are those determined? Yeah.
So there's a calculation. We basically run expenditure information out of our accounting program. And there's a formula, there's worksheets attached from the Agency of Education. We plug the numbers in with our enrollment numbers. And it tells us to deduct certain things and add in certain things. And then it calculates a number for us. So it's based on our own expenditure and enrollment information. But there's a formula for it that's given to us by the Agency of Education.
And so this is the amount that someone would pay
if they wanted to come into our school.
Right.
Isn't it less than?
What's that?
It's less than what we have.
It's less than our per pupil expenditure.
It is. It is, and that's because it doesn't include, you take out things like debt service, food service doesn't qualify. So there's certain pieces that come out of the number.
Do we have
And
any-
it's also based on enrollment, which is an even head count of students, not equalized.
Oh, we don't
not
get
weighting.
0.1
We don't
students?
get 0.13 or 1.7 or, we don't get any of those weightings. So it's a straight head count
Do we have
calculation.
leeway on that, or that's the calculation?
No, it's pretty, like I said, it's in a worksheet, so there's an elementary worksheet and there's a secondary worksheet that they give to us, and they tell us, they send instructions on how to put what expenditures where, so, yeah, it's pretty formula driven.
All right. Any questions, comments on that? All right, all in favor of accepting that announced tuition, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? And the motion passes. Financial management questionnaire.
This is the completed financial management questionnaire, and it needs the board chair to sign with title and date. It's also signed by myself after going through it. Basically, how I did this is I went and looked at last year's template, walked through and made any changes to any personnel that was doing things differently or anything that we're doing differently. There's also notes off to the right-hand side if there's anything that I would suggest for change in the future or anything like that, so.
So I need a motion.
Elizabeth, is this like to check your control environment? Is it, it's that?
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
internal
all-
controls, basically.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing that our auditors walk through. When they come
Right.
in the door, they sit down with us and ask questions. And this is basically the Vermont version of statute that says you have to walk through this questionnaire every
So
year.
you're following, you're following the Vermont version?
Yes.
Thank you, I'm familiar with that,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
It's not just school board.
No, I've read it
It's
a
very
million
similar to what the
times, yeah.
auditors do also, though. They do another version of it. It's actually more robust than this one.
Got it.
A lot more questions.
Thanks.
Did you make changes from last year?
There are changes to say who is covering certain positions, and so their name, you might see somebody's name change on the right-hand side of who's doing that operation.
Move to have the chair sign the checklist.
Second.
Continue conversation now.
Now we can debate.
Right.
So I appreciate you really wicked busy and so on and so forth, but I really would have appreciated having this beforehand. Just because it's something that's really important for the board to do and to understand. And passing it around for us to, passing it around for us to look at on the fly. I really would.
It was definitely timing, though, with all the other things that we had to,
Does it have
that
to
we
be
were
I
working
know,
on.
I'm-
Absolutely.
I would not, I'm
I
not
totally
intending to be-
understand.
Just
I
for the
think we
future,
would,
I
I
would-
think we may have sent it previously last year.
did.
And we didn't this year. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
So here, I'll pass it and I'll look at it before it's signed. But can we take the vote?
Okay.
Okay. all in favor of signing off on that, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Oh, provide budget guidance to the administration.
If I may.
If you want to make a motion? Yeah, go ahead.
I believe that looking at the tax implications of the do-nothing and the problems that are generated by the below penalty, that I would move that we adopt the ACS repurpose budget.
We're not really adopting, we're just giving
Well,
guidance to
okay,
move the administration
that we,
move forward.
that we give guidance for that model.
I'll second.
What's the motion? Sorry.
That we give guidance to proceed with the ACS repurpose.
Budget model. All right, there's a motion and a second. So conversation.
Just cutting off any analysis or review of the other two? We're just gonna focus only on this particular one, or is this just what the main focus will be, and we'll still be looking at others? I just mean in how you'd wanna handle this
Right.
guidance.
I think they're looking to narrow things down at
Right.
this
Yeah.
point, yeah.
I think that that's the one that makes the most sense. And I would like to see that further refined. But I'm not against if someone wants to ask more questions about one of the others.
I'm in agreement with it, just wanted to make sure I
Yeah.
was clear on what guidance we were giving you. So that when you walk out of here, like,
Yeah,
okay,
what-
so what did they tell you?
Would it make sense for us to, to George's motion, to give, let's say we were given this in January and we have to come to a vote on it. Let's say this is the one that we end up adopting. What are the questions you would like to have answered or changes made or clarified in order to be able to, vote affirmatively or against? And then perhaps even after this, if anybody wants to ask additional questions, I think we want to focus your energy in one particular area, so I don't think we want to say refine all three. But if there are clarifying questions on another model, could we still make a motion on those as additional guidance if that popped up?
So we're not adopting
Right.
the budget right now, we're just
Right.
giving guidance on how to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And again, I think they're looking for targeted guidance.
So to
not like,
George's motion.
We just want more,
Since that motion is being handled right now, we should give whatever guidance we'd like on this particular model then.
Mhm.
Thank you.
George?
I think there are significant blocks of voters who would vote against any one of these three options.
Right.
Yes.
And, we've been accused as a board in the past of ruling like kings in the recent past. So I'd like to throw out an idea. What if, and I understand this may be more labor intensive, and I apologize to Elizabeth, but what if we did, provided 2 or even 3 options with some sort of an instant voter runoff approach?
Oh, I don't know if we can do that.
And put
For a
that to
budget
the-
vote?
And put that to the voters, yeah.
I don't think,
I don't think we can, we have to adopt a budget, the board has to adopt a
You can't
budget
adopt
for
3.
warning.
yeah,
Yeah, you can adopt it.
the,
It's a dollar amount.
yeah.
Right. It is a dollar amount. It's not necessarily, but we know what the dollar amount represents.
I appreciate what you're trying to do though, George.
What I'm trying to head off is we put one out there and it fails.
Right.
And then we gotta put another one
Yeah.
out there and it fails.
Yeah, the model
And
is
then we're
great.
at number 3, whatever
Right.
scenario.
Right, because
we
whatever
go
you
through.
do, maybe Addison votes this one down, or Ferrisburg votes that one down, but then Virgins also has a say, obviously, Panton, Waltham, so
Yeah, so that was my thought process is,
Right.
if we could,
it makes sense.
No, I understand what you're trying for, yeah, I
So-
understand, but I don't think we can, I think we need to adopt a dollar amount by January 22nd. To put out as our proposed budget.
And I believe if you do any sort of instant runoff, it has to go to the legislature and be approved by them before you can do it. And that's just for regular elections, and I don't know where this budget
There's a
question
special
falls.
statute about it.
Is there any reason we can't incorporate some of these items from the second additional budget that were, for example, in Sheila's report here, into this A, I'm calling it A?
Some of the cuts from B into A?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you?
I'm not sure if I have particular ones in mind, but.
Do you mean?
Reducing a
the
bus,
do
for
nothing
example.
budget incorporate?
No, some of the below
No, you had two sets of bullet points.
Cuts in B to A.
You could add
This
some of
being
them
B and that being A.
for more savings or something.
Alder has his hand.
I'm sorry.
Honestly, the community has asked for some of these cuts and for us to look at admin and to look at central office and find ways to reduce it. Can we not do that?
Speak up, please.
Sorry.
We can't hear you at all.
Sorry, I'm trying. I think the community has asked for some of these, cuts at the admin and at the office level. I think it would be wrong to ignore that entirely, to see where we can,
So what you're proposing is A plus additional cuts?
yes.
A, okay.
Yeah.
All right, Alder.
Looking at this from a student perspective, which is what I'm here to do. A seems like it would negatively impact all the students of the district the least, and I think that there is an argument that can be made that moving the Addison students to the Virgins Elementary School could benefit their education experience. You know, because having too small class sizes is not beneficial for students. And I think that that is important, and it also saves the most money from what I could tell, and includes this alternative program for students. So looking at this, I see I see that for the students of the district, that makes the most sense, and to me, it makes the most financial sense. And, you know, I think that would be, I think that's the easiest sell to make to all 5 towns of the district.
I would just say that 3 with sum of 1, which would be do nothing, somewhere, because it's still 80,000 long. So there's gonna be that play back to you get 80,000 play with, get back to get back to the level. My feeling is that number 3,
Wait, which one are you saying, number 3?
well, 1 is do nothing, and 3 is keep the schools the way they are, but take out the cost, your net 80
Okay.
short.
Okay. The below threshold.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you still have 80 to play, so you can head back to 1 with 80,000, follow what I'm saying. I think 3 does 2 things. One is I think it addresses the spirit of the vote. I think 2, it buys us more time without screwing with the total infrastructure of how it's set up now. It provides the board and the community and the school and the superintendent time to readdress what we want the long term to be, what the final product is going to look like, because we have, of course, a couple more years of this ahead of us. My sense, I could be wrong, but my sense is number 2 is we open a door that we won't be able to come back out of again by pushing Addison into Virgins, which would certainly, in my opinion, upset the voters of Addison who voted in November, and also makes us a commitment to the alternative school system we would put there. So as I look at it, my sense is to support 3 for those reasons, that it addresses the voters' concerns from a month ago, and I think it buys the board another year to focus on the problems that lay ahead.
Can I see some other?
It's a question. 3 does not include the reconfiguration of Addison. It leaves everything as is right now. And then the alternative school will be lost to us entirely, I understand. Is that a correct stick? Oh, she's gone. You're back there somewhere? Okay.
Unless it goes in the basement. Here.
Unless we put it somewhere else with the idea of moving it again,
Correct.
because we'd have to move it again when, probably. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So, I have to say, I've felt sick most of the day, because I believe that I believe that A, the repurposing Addison provides the best educational opportunities for the most students in the district. But I am also sensitive to what Brad said about the voters. I think the voters in Addison understood what they were doing was that they were saying we want an elementary school. And I'm really torn because my responsibility as a member of a school board who is thinking about all of the students in the district tells me that I should be supporting repurposing Addison into the alternative program. My responsibility to the democratic process, even if there are lack of clarity, says I should be supporting B. I'm really torn. I think A is the best solution, but yeah.
I think that one of the things that we have tried to do through the past 2 or 3 years, whenever we were up against this question, was that we tried to preserve the quality of education and programs. And I think that there's no question but what, given the economic consideration, that repurposing Addison is the only way to do that.
There you go?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So, as a general matter, to give direction to where you all are right now, I would say, I think we're like on the right track here. We have 2 models here that we can continue to talk about with the public, and they're fairly fleshed out. We've learned about them today. We can continue talking about them. I still have, there's a lot of information that I'd like to know. I mean, we have, goals for the district. We want to encourage and develop the middle school. Well, how are we going to do that? Which of these budgets are going to give us the best chance? I'd like to answer that question. Which is going to give us the best chance to do that? Which is going to give us the best chance to be able to put the most number of kids in this building? This one, the one that has the most opportunity for kids, the best facility that we have. I'd like to know some other questions as we think a little bit about these. Like the tax rates are going to change a little bit. So what is equity going to look like? Back in the beginning, when we were really talking about the elementary schools, what we started to see was that when this is all of our taxpayer dollars, right? All of our money comes to a pot, and so how does it get divvied out per student? And we were paying, or we estimated that we were going to pay about $2,800 more per student at Addison, as opposed to Virginia's. We could be spending that money for all of our kids. I'd like to know more about the per pupil spending at the schools, because that's an issue of equity. Equity right now, because it is inequitable right now. So I'd like to learn more about that. And
You'd like to learn more in how that would change?
How that would change, what that would look like.
Between
those two different models.
Okay.
And I'd like to ask more directly, which of these sets us up for the future to be able to put this district in the best possible situation for the budgets that are to come down the road, because we know that we're going to continue to lose students. So what's going to give us the best chance for those? So what I would like to say, like as direction from me, is that we're on the right track. We have some models that we're looking at and that I don't know that this board has to decide. I'm not ready to vote today. I'd like to take these models and go talk to many people and have conversations about these things, because we don't have to decide right now. We're not ready to decide right now. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the answer to your last question is actually in the superintendent's report. She did talk about which one sets us up on the best path for the future.
And I'd like to continue to flesh out that question.
Right. So what do you mean by flesh it out? I mean, I'm just
have
wondering-
more time to talk about what that looks like. I mean, with those cuts in the in the B budget, is that going to give us the best chance to be able to meet our continuous improvement plans?
No.
You know, I'd like to know what that means. I mean, are we gonna stop making the strides that we have been as a district by holding on to something that it's gonna have 12 kids in one grade in elementary with a combined 5th and 6th, when we can move them in, do something really cool with this CVA. I just don't think we have to decide right now. I'd like to learn more. I'm ready to learn more. I'm ready to talk with the community members.
And you're talking just about A and B, or are you looking at do nothing as well?
Well, do nothing's always gonna be there.
I mean, I guess I will come right to you, but I mean, I think you can get the answers to some of those questions now, too, right? But go ahead.
I mean, it's sounding to me like the do nothing with the big tax increases, I don't hear anyone arguing for that path. So to a certain extent, we've narrowed it down to 2. And if I'm looking at these numbers right, one is 21,750,000 and one's 21,813,000. It's a $63,000 difference. If we have to warn a number, I mean, you could warn the higher number with the add-on question as part of the ballot. Which one do you want? Just for instance, throw out my multi-vote idea again.
I mean, you could.
You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. I did find the statute about warning the vote. and
But
it-
you're voting for, you're voting for a number.
Right.
And a configuration.
And a configuration simultaneously.
Mhm,
You gotta
mhm.
pick one or the other.
Okay, all right, Alder and then.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm going to speak now as someone who's going to be voting in March.
Yeah.
So for Jen's people, this applies especially to you. As a voter, I am going to rather want to vote for something that is going to preserve quality of education instead of, you were talking about how we spend more money on students in Addison. Like, as a voter, I would rather see that money go to enhancing the quality of education for all kids and all of our students instead of going to this building where, yeah, we have like 11 kid classes with 2 grades combined. I just don't think that that's equitable or sustainable for the future. And I think that the sooner you make a decision, the longer time you have to market that decision to people. Like, one of the big responses that I heard when we were talking about the school reconfiguration from like September on is people were like, I didn't have enough time to really consider this decision. And I think the earlier you're like, this is a focus we have, I think that's the longer people have to wrap their heads around it. And I think that this makes the most sense, even for students in Addison. It's not equitable even for them to be in such a small situation. Their education would be enriched by going to the Regents Elementary School just based on the diversity of the student body there, having more voices in class, having more opinions. I don't have, obviously, these studies on hand right now, but there is information out there that says that that is what benefits students. And I think that you can really sell A in a way that the B, the do nothing with the below threshold, isn't going to have that sort of appeal.
I think that the idea of waiting until March to decide is probably not appropriate in terms of staffing and,
I'm not sure we
and,
can
and
go
those.
the way you're proposing, but I would say I would agree with what you're saying. I think staff needs to know what's happening.
Yeah.
And I think postponing the ambiguity for the rest of the year is gonna be pretty unpalatable for folks. And I think people just need to know.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that, when Christine and Mark and I went to that faculty meeting, it was pretty apparent that, like, people, we need to pick a direction sooner rather than later.
All right.
For the
Then-
health of our system.
Okay. I'm
So-
perfectly willing and to say that I am leaning towards A. And I would like you to consider to continue to see how cuts in the B area can help us with A.
Bill, did you want to say something?
Yeah, there's so many things that I think we all want to say, but since the motion right now is to provide guidance on the repurpose ACS model, I wanted to come back to what I'd mentioned earlier. I would really like to see, if you're going to flesh out additional details, some information about how busing could potentially work if ACS is repurposed to accommodate the transportation needs of the kids who would be moved to another school. I think just that's a budget detail that I'd really like to see more on, if there's a potential to have conversations with the transportation company before we vote on the budget.
I'm not sure they could redo the routes between now and next month, but I can ask. I mean, because that's essentially what we're saying, is take a look at our whole system and imagine that this is what's, happening.
Yep, that's exactly the question. Yeah.
Redo the routes.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, timing-wise, it's really hard for them to flesh out a number of different scenarios and hypotheticals. They're not using a software tool to do that.
I understand, yeah, I do. I think we have to at least ask that question and see if there's a way. One of the concerns the Addison residents had early on in all of this is, are my kids going to be on the bus a lot
Right.
longer? It already feels like a long
Right.
route as it is, and so I just feel, I feel like, obligated to look at that.
Right, so
Right.
when they did do the busing, they did talk with the busing company earlier on, and they said that it was an extra, it would be an additional, was it 10 or 10 minutes? 10.
But I think what we were
At,
also
you know,
talking about is the
maximum.
notion that maybe we could reduce that so that it isn't,
Right.
By adding a bus. So it's I'm willing to
Yeah.
ask the question.
Or moving a bus, like I
Yep.
said, within Virgins for able-bodied
Right.
students who are close, it's, I think we all agree it's healthier for them, to walk or ride or roll,
And legally, we don't have to provide.
Yeah, and like, that's right. I mean, if you're that close, and I don't want to sound like an old man, but when I was young,
I was just hearing that over here.
oh, yeah.
Barefoot
I'll talk
through the
like
snow.
a young man. When I was young, I never took the bus to school, and I live in Virginia.
There you go, Alder.
It's very doable.
Yeah, my
So
kids
just,
are-
I think that's important to think about. And then when C40 comes up, I'd also, it's not for now, but I'd like to talk about what kinds of choices we can give Addison residents within the district, but
Yep.
that's for another topic. And then if we're throwing out ideas for, here are the things that I'd like the community to challenge my thinking on. I don't know what I would pick. If I had to pick today between one of these budget scenarios, I won't say which one I would pick, but I'm going to say that if I were looking at A favorably, here are the things I would need to be convinced otherwise of. Addison gave us a clear message with their vote that they don't want to close their school as an elementary school. Over the last several years, they've also given us a clear message that they don't want to pay for what it costs right now. We don't get yes votes from Addison residents in general. And so I don't know how I reconcile the desire, a strong desire and clear desire in that vote to keep the school as an elementary school with the historical votes of Addison, which is we can't afford these school budgets anymore. And I don't know how to reconcile that. And so that's the feedback. Fill our email inboxes. And I know I'll be regretting that, but do it. I also don't think that we would ever let Ferrisburg or Virgins get down to 70 students without having had conversations years earlier about closing them. And so I know some people feel like Addison is being singled out and treated bad, and maybe people don't feel that way, but for anybody who does, I think that we've given tremendous respect and patience with the situation Addison is in. the kind of situation that none of the other schools would have ever gotten. I mean, Ferrisburg would never get down to 70, 60, 70, yeah, 60 students. For us to still be talking about trying to find a way to keep it open. So challenge me on that. Challenge any of us. And then finally, there are a lot of people that I've spoken with. I shouldn't say a lot. There are, I've spoken with families that account for 7 students that are currently at ACS who would like to not be at ACS. And I'm not going to say their names. Some of them have spoken openly in meetings, but some of them have not. And so I'm concerned that there are people, even within the school, that maybe the town likes the idea of keeping it the way it was, but even many of the families within the school would like more choice. And so that makes me think, when we talk about C40, that even if we keep Addison open as an elementary school next year, that we should still allow some of these folks choice. And so those are just some of my thoughts. I'm sorry if I took too long.
Okay.
Is there any way, I don't know if that would violate like a policy or anything, is there any way that like the superintendent could send out a survey specifically to those Addison Central School parents and ask them that question and ask them what they think about those budgets? Because I think that's what you're saying, right? Is you're hearing
it
feedback
is,
from
yeah,
them.
and I don't know what to do with that. I think it's a good question, Alden, but would some families be hesitant to answer that, saying, yeah, I'd like my kids to move out of Addison because they don't want, I don't know. It maybe puts families in a difficult situation too, but I don't know.
I think it's at least worth it to ask the
Yeah.
question.
All right, so we have a motion to ask the administration to further refine budget option A. Is there more discussion on that? Yeah, yeah.
One quick question about the 2 proposals, A and B. In your estimation, which of these budgets puts us in the best situation down the road in the following year and the following year?
I think I wrote
I
to
know-
that effect,
yeah.
just in that, if we reduce the staff as indicated on the repurposing budget, then we start the year next year having already made those reductions.
Yeah.
Whereas if we don't, we're faced with,
We're right
another
back here, right.
another budget challenge next year where we're having very similar conversations, right? We're gonna be looking for the same dollar amount, if not more. And, I don't see us in any better position, necessarily, I mean, except for the fact that, I think when I'm speaking about the quality of education, I'm speaking about learning opportunities for students and so forth. It's really difficult for me in my position, and I think it's more so your role to determine, sort of what the community reaction to such a change would be. And so how do you weigh that against some of these other things? I don't know. That's, I think, what you're grappling with. Because I mean, we're all well aware of the impact, emotionally and otherwise, I
Right.
think, to the folks in the communities that would be impacted.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, yes.
So I've been thinking about this for a while, a few weeks. And, pardon me?
Only a few weeks.
Only. And I know it's kind of like the third rail, or Social Security is the third rail. And that's the negotiations. I mean, we haven't met with the teachers, but if everything goes historically like it has been, we're going to settle for a 3.2, 3.5% increase in their salaries. That's about $400,000. We have settled for a 3 to 4% increase on their salaries for year after year after year. And if we held steady and said, I would really like to keep on increasing our teachers' salaries. I'd really like to keep on increasing our superintendent's salary. I'd really like to keep on increasing our director's salaries. But anyway, no one is talking about holding on increases on union salaries. And it's $400,000 plus or minus. And I just wanted to mention that is a potential savings if we negotiate it that way. Just throwing it out
So
there.
you're absolutely right, but, that it's, well, it wouldn't be a potential savings. Do you want to speak to the process, George, of how, I mean, like, the process, like, if we don't come to agreement, then it moves into mediation.
Yes. And then somebody else makes the decision.
So we have a mediator, we have mediated talks.
Yeah, I know how the negotiations
And
work.
then it goes
I
into
know.
an arbitration
Right.
after that, if there's no, all of which happens after the budget's been passed, right?
Yeah.
So we couldn't budget, even if we held fast, we couldn't budget.
No,
So, right.
even if you were gonna say, we aren't giving raises this year, and you put it in the budget that way, and the budget passes, then you can very potentially end up with an arbitrator down the road saying, well, I'm sorry, but you gotta give them 6%.
Right. Or everyone else in
And-
the state gave 3%, so
That's
that's
right.
what the decision.
And you, at that point, have no say in it.
Well, you could impose,
Yeah.
you have the right to impose, and then the union has the right to strike.
We all lose.
We're all losing.
So
We
those
are all
but, I mean, but
freaking
that's the
losing.
process, right? That's the
Whether
process.
we take that position or not, we are all losing.
We,
Okay.
we understand what you're saying, and we try, when we negotiate, to do it as inexpensively as we can.
But it will still result in a significant increase in salaries. Period, end of questions. That's just the way it's going to be.
Well, and don't forget that the healthcare's going up 14%.
I'm just talking salaries.
Right, but, I mean, right. So, and a salary increase offsets that as well, I guess is what I'm saying. So we're paying the healthcare increase, the staff is paying the healthcare increase as well.
Correct.
We're also personally all paying healthcare increases. I mean,
I agree.
all of our taxpayers are paying healthcare increases. Right. Do people want to vote on this motion?
Yeah, let's.
Repeat the motion. The motion was to direct the administration to further develop budget scenario A, ACS repurpose.
Yeah.
Do we need to amend to encourage them to also pursue options from?
If someone wants to make an amendment, then now's the time to do that.
I think they've heard that. Yeah, they've heard that. They will. Doesn't have.
What was it? Is it to do what?
No, they have heard it. Do you need to make an amendment to make this? Yeah, amend it. I'll amend it. Go for it. Yeah.
Educational value, right?
Yes.
Amend the motion on the floor.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you listen to what Elizabeth just said.
She made a nice wording. Yes, go ahead.
I'm not sure I can repeat everything she just said, but I've moved that we amend the motion to include incorporating options for cutting, for eliminating from, as outlined in the second additional budget option.
Do you want to? She added with limited educational.
Well, with the
impact. Do you-
understanding that the intention is to further reduce the budget, but without detriment to the students' education and,
Is
yeah.
Is that your intent?
Yes.
Seconding?
Second.
I said it differently.
The amendment is to include some of the cuts that are now listed under the below threshold budget into the ACS repurpose budget with the intent to reduce the overall budget without impacting, with limited impact to education. Right? Yes? I was just saying that for Gloria's sake. Okay, all right, so, discussion on that, or do you want to vote on that amendment?
I think we already discussed it.
Okay, can we vote on the amendment? Is, all in favor of that amendment, please?
And was there a second?
Yes.
John seconded, the amendment is by Keith. All in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? One abstention. The motion, the amendment passes. Okay, so we have an amended motion now. Ready to vote?
Yep.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Two opposed? Abstaining?
So am I.
You're abstaining?
I'm abstaining.
Two opposed, two abstaining. How many ayes? I believe the ayes have it.
Yes,
Should we
there's
count?
7 O's.
7? Two
Just
opposed.
to clarify, we are not showing a preference for that budget in this vote. We are asking for further fleshing out. Nowhere in the motion was there any word favorable or preference, just to be clear about that.
We're asking for that one.
We're
to
asking
be
for additional details on that budget with some guidance through the amendment.
If we sit here next month and decide that we're going to adopt the do-nothing budget, then we can do that. But this just drives us to more information in this direction.
Can I just add to, I'm not sure if I should say this, but I'm not sure how much more clarification we can provide on this budget, other than the fact that these are the things that were eliminated. There's not much that's discretionary in that. So the only change is really the change that Keith has added into that, which provides us an opportunity to go back and incorporate some additional changes. Like, as is, there's really no refining.
Other than these numbers changing, right, these numbers
Right.
changing too would affect.
But I mean,
yeah.
there's no further clarification than eliminate 9 positions, eliminate one, there's no, just adding that. There's not much we can do with that information.
Can I suggest that we change the per pupil, equalized pupil number down to the 950 from the 961? And be more conservative?
How would we assess whether 950 was just a number that was thrown out, I think, by Tom, as a, like, what would that do?
Well, I don't know why you came up with the 961, and I heard you agreeing with him. So
961.
It sounds like the 961's not conservative enough.
961 was based on enrollment numbers and data that we had back in May originally. And now we have October 1st enrollment numbers, but we're waiting for the information to come from the state. So
These are bottoms-up numbers, and these are enrollment
yeah,
of this.
it's still our number, but we basically need information from the state because, like I said, until the state of Vermont receives everybody's data, that base in the calculation keeps changing. So our number, I can't just give Brad James my number and have him say, what's our number? It doesn't work that way. He has to calculate in everyone's number.
Yeah, I understand. What I'm
Right.
suggesting is that this may not be conservative enough. That's my
Possibly, but I don't know
suggestion.
how not conservative it isn't.
Well,
Like,
we
I don't
don't
know
know-
whether
of
to
course we
reduce
don't
it by
know.
5 or 10 and what are we basing that on rather than just waiting for the state to tell us what it is? That's the reason why we haven't changed it.
I think what she was agreeing to is a difference of 10 students eats up the savings.
Yes, that's what I
Puts
was
us
agreeing to.
At
Yep.
ground level. That's, I think, what you were agreeing to, when Tom said is 950.
So
Right.
you're saying that this is as conservative as we're going to go, and you don't think we
For
should go
now.
any more conservative?
Until we get more information from the state, yeah.
Elizabeth, do you think that last year was an abnormal year? Do you think on a normal year, assuming they existed, on a normal year by January 13th, will you have a revised number from the state? that
I
you
believe
could
so.
that you could
Usually
incorporate
the
into-
first round of numbers comes out sometime in December. And then from there, they're trying to get corrected data from districts that they believe have errors in their data. And so as they work through that, you'll start to see the number fluctuate a little bit. But comparatively, last year, I feel like the number just went off the charts. It just kept going way up and way down and way up and way down because the data coming in was changing so much. I mean, at one point, there was only half of the districts had submitted their information. Whereas this year, I believe that largely, most districts have at least submitted their initial information at this point. And they're, you know, working through those changes. So I'm hoping last year was the anomaly.
We'll have actually a fairly reasonable.
And that the number we get the first time around is pretty close to accurate and not gonna change drastically.
Right.
I think so. Right.
We're way behind
I
schedule.
know.
So,
You're stating the obvious.
So
What-
we're
what-
supposed to, our next, moving on to the.
Yes, the
We're
charge.
supposed to provide a CEC charge for the upcoming sessions. I don't know how we can move something without having a little more information before we can
I think
have a
Christina
motion.
might have a little more information for us.
So I was just hoping we could
Right.
get that before we had the before.
Yes, I think we can
the
do that.
motion.
We can have some background information. And the reason for this is because there's a meeting, the committee's meeting next week to plan next steps, so.
So I think we were looking for some guidance on what you folks would want the Community Engagement Committee to engage people on. And, you know, if come up with some sort of, you know, ideas to talk with people about. But based on, you know, what we just decided to, you know, we could throw that in the mix. But, you know, clearly people are wanting to talk to us and sit down with us, I think. So the idea would be to possibly hold 2 to 3 sessions coming up in January and February, where we, whatever we propose, you know, I'm thinking of it in kind of relation to, you know, our district, our future. Where do we go from here after we decide on this budget? And what do we want to talk to people about, you know, and have kind of open sessions where we, kind of similar to our last one, where we, you know, do group discussions, and the committee will sort of kind of talk about the format. But whatever that format turns out to be, you know, we would turn whatever topics we choose, you know, those engagement sessions, we'd do a survey, use town meeting, and then hopefully by the beginning of April, be able to come up with some kind of summary report based on what direction you want the committee to go in terms of engagement. Some topics, you know, the best way to use the 4 buildings, which we've been talking about. Childcare needs, pre-K, further consolidation in Addison County with the other school districts. You know, I'm just throwing out ideas. Yeah, and then, you know, pros, cons, hopes, dreams about, you know, how do we get in the legislators and, you know, the state to help us, which is clearly what we need.
Or at least not hurt us.
Right, you know, yeah, so those are just some.
I think those are great. I think that we don't have to come up with the whole list because the community will, you know, like, just like last year. But one of the things I wanted to throw out there, and I hate to be all doom and gloom, but I think we're all thinking about this. So Elizabeth, we're done, like, let's say we're done reconfiguring, right? We don't need to, Ferrisburg will never have to close for the next 3 to 5 years, right? Like, we never, you can't say that, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so obviously it's a loaded question. I think we need to be really clear with the community that these community engagement meetings may also be about restructuring in the future. Even if Addison Central School is repurposed, and especially if it isn't,
Yeah.
we're not done having those conversations. And so for people who wanted a full year to talk about it, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
This
And
is
so
where
just,
we
I think we
launch.
have to be really clear about
Yeah.
that early on to get people's attention, because some people criticized us for not using the word schools closing early enough in the process to get their attention, and I know we have their attention now, and so I want to say the word school closings on the horizon even after this budget, and
Yeah.
just, you know, I hate to have to say that, but that's our reality. And it's not the only solution, but it is one of the things that our district will have to consider in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Anybody
would the
else?
plan be for a meeting before, one community meeting before our next board meeting? And then maybe one after that, before we go to the budget? And then one after that in March? Is that your idea? Like
Well-
basically one a month?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the committee can kind of flesh out a schedule, but this engagement process isn't going to be related to the school budget,
No,
right?
I think the reality is, when you meet on the 17th, that's going to be the talk, and if you meet in any time before January 22nd, that's going to be the talk. So if you're hoping to have the long-term discussions, I think budget is going to be on everyone's mind, and that's where you're going to be here, which is
Sure.
important, but, and you can try and curtail that into, and okay, so the budgets are going to lead for the next 3 to 5 year scenario. But if you're going to meet in next week and then early in January, it's not going to be discussions of long-term planning. It's going to be what's happening on the vote of the 22nd.
But see, last year we postponed everything until after the budget.
I know, I'm just,
And then
We ran out of time.
ran out
I'm
of
just
time.
talking
Yeah.
about what the
Right.
reality of
So
those
at some
conversations would
point,
be.
we need to have parallel conversations of,
And this is a,
yeah.
this
Yeah,
Our
this is the
17th
plan.
meeting's a planning meeting for the future engagement we want to do with
Okay.
our communities moving forward in the future.
Got it.
So, you know, barring our current budget season, frankly, because, you know, that
Right.
engaging the public on that probably needs to be a different conversation in a different group. You know, maybe the finance committee holds a forum about discussing the budget
So,
with the,
Well, that's all of our
Okay.
job,
yeah, yeah, or all of us, right, or what.
so, how about, because we're looking for a charge.
Or just some
Just some
direction on
direction,
like
yeah.
ideas that you think are important to.
So I would move that you ask the community to envision the school system, the district, over the next 3 to 5 years, what needs they think will be going on, how to best manage future conversations about reconfiguration. What were some of the other things that
She said childcare, pre-K,
that was those were some
regional
of the
life.
needs?
Regional
Oh, and
consolidation.
visions for regional,
Yep.
regional consolidation.
Okay. Everybody,
But these are suggestions, we're not making a motion.
yeah, I don't need them,
Well, it is an action item on here.
That's
We
why-
have
The
a
committee
charge.
has an
Yeah.
ongoing charge,
Yeah.
but this is just a direction for this next round.
Sure, you can make an emotion, however you.
Well, I mean,
whatever works best.
I think thinking about it in terms of a 5-year asking the community to think about it in terms of a 5-year window, I think Bill's right, that we're not hiding that future that we're not done reconfiguring whatever,
Right.
that this isn't done. And there's a lot of energy and interest, and so like help us flesh out what needs people see. I know, early childcare is something that I've heard in a number of different places.
Other alternative education models like magnet schools and things like that, not just for special ed. Who knows? Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
And I think the beauty of this is the community, I mean, the whole idea is for us to maybe set a little skeleton for some ideas, so that we have at least something to start with, but that the community, you know, that, I know they're all sitting out there right now and listening at home, and they've got like, oh, I have a list of 50 things I want you guys to think about or know about. And so I think that it'll have an organic growth that, you know, we don't have to worry too much about it.
Okay, so, I mean, maybe it's just a motion that we're directing the committee to hold a series of events.
I move that the Community Engagement Committee hold a series of events over the next several months focusing
bring
on.
back a report.
Focusing on the future of the district, and that they ideally provide us a report, and they aim to provide us a report in April.
Second that.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstaining? All right. Is that good?
works.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, provide guidance to the VSBA voting delegate regarding health insurance ratification vote. So I think Glory's going to be our voting, or you are our voting delegate already. We're supposed to provide you guidance. I mean, I think you either vote it up or you vote it down. So we need a motion. And if she votes it down, there's really, we don't really have any options here. So.
I move that we advise you to approve whatever healthcare the mediator comes with.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, could you, where are we? I actually want the discussion. I don't,
Oh, right.
I needed a motion for discussion.
So, the two plans are out there. There's a summary. Did everyone get that, the summary of the
Yeah.
difference between the two? Yeah, amongst your
I'm
many
sorry,
other
I've had
emails, I'm sure,
pneumonia.
Tom.
I've been out of it for the last 3 weeks.
It came.
Yeah,
I
it
think
came from the
everyone got it.
VSBA. And
Pneumonia.
they're pretty far off between the HRA and the HSA and the amounts in the HRA and the HSA. And that's the one that stuck out to me the most. Did anybody else look at it and find something that stuck out more?
Timing, there was some timing.
Yeah, there was some
It's going to affect
enrollment.
what counts as full-time or part-time, some hours were different.
Right, like 17
Yeah,
versus
right.
18 hours.
Part-time. It didn't seem like it was going to have an enormous
For the
impact on
of how we
us.
already have healthcare structured in this district,
It's not a big,
either side, either one really doesn't change
Too much,
us.
yeah.
We're already in the 80-20, we already give the HRA, so it really, either one is not really gonna be detrimental or helpful. Yeah,
Some rowdies.
so,
So
All
I
right.
move that we.
No, we already
It's
have a
already-
motion and a
all right.
second. Are we ready to
That was
vote? All in
discussion.
favor?
aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, thank you for doing that.
thank you.
Okay, we need to approve a hire. You did send us
Yep.
the information.
Interim position for the remainder of the year, Francesca Martinelli, who will be our school counselor at VUES.
I'll move to accept the recommendation of the superintendent.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes, and we need to approve those two $100 donations that were in Elizabeth's report.
I move that we approve the $100 donations that were in Elizabeth's report, and I'm sorry, I can't pull them up, one from the Flying Pig Bookstore
To FCS.
for $100, and
The other one from the Davis family.
the other one from the Davis family, also
Ooh,
for $100.
yes.
Second.
Yeah, Flying Pig was to Addison. Right,
Correct.
with a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for the donations. All right, I believe that terminates our action items and brings us to public comment. Gosh.
2 hours left.
All right, Martha.
So my name is Martha Kenfield. I'm a resident of Virgins, and I just want to give a really big shout out to all the students from our high school that participated in the sleep out. My son was one of them, and if you weren't aware of what the temperature was on Saturday, it was frigid. It was probably the coldest night this winter, and they were outside all night long. And there was a lot of adults there. I went down when they got started setting up. It was a very interesting experience that they had by a group. And I did see some students from Middlebury, but I have to say, Virgins had the first students on site for the longest period of time. So there should just be huge kudos given out to them. And I just would like also to highly commend the Walden program, because my son would not have done this without me participating in that program, so.
Kai Williams from Waltham. I think that regarding community meetings and conversations, large meetings have their purpose, but one of the issues with what happened with the school closure votes is that there wasn't enough small meetings. And so once one narrative, the Save Our Schools narrative, took over, there was social pressures where other community voices, I think, it just didn't, there wasn't as much of a diversity of opinion. So I think looking at going forwards to recommend, I know I can't do it, but to think about having setting up smaller conversations. There's a model called Community Learning Conversations, where you have a neutral facilitator in a local person's home, and you have 10 or 12 people. And it would also provide a great community service opportunity for high schoolers.
Thanks, Kai.
Thank you.
Yeah, George Eisenhart, resident of Addison. First, I want to make a statement that, you know, the concern about the money on the budget, good management, not the money makes a quality education. But as a board, there has to be a strong fiscal responsibility of that. And I make that statement coming from experience. I have a question for Elizabeth. Do you know, or she's gone, what the projected income is?
The revenue?
Yes.
It is in our reports, which will be attached, and the revenue can vary depending on what's added or reduced from the budget. But it is included in our budget scenarios that the board has received tonight, so they'll be attached to the meeting minutes for each model.
And for those who are in negotiations, you can impose a low salary on the teachers, but you have to be willing to go through that, and that's pretty distant down. You got to go through mediation, and you have to say no, but you can impose a contract.
Yes.
A few things, but quickly, if we don't lose elementary sports. Oh, sorry. Mary Neffinger, Ferrisburg. If we don't lose elementary sports this year, I would like to see us move to a model where parents can pay. That's what used to happen, like the Fusion program. Like, if you can afford, pay how much it costs. If you want to pay more to supplement someone else who can't pay, then that could help that program survive a little bit longer. Speaking of recycling, this is how much paper I received this year that I had to hold on to. I have 5 of the exact same district calendar, and that doesn't include the paperwork that I had to sign and return to the school. That is the exact same paperwork that I fill out every single year. This is something I wanted to bring forward before, but obviously other things came up. I don't know if it makes more sense to move to a digital thing where we can say, check, nothing has changed, and you will save money on paper and toner. Maybe that doesn't make sense. I hope someone could look into that, because if it does save money, there's another small thing. Third thing, I think we pay like $40,000 a year for the EEE busing. My son goes to EEE, and there's been more than once where he's been the only person on the bus, and it's a full-size bus. Is there any creative way we could use a van with car seats that we have bought to bus kids back and forth? Has anyone looked into efficiencies with that? I think we own a van for the high school, right? At least one van, and maybe the schedules don't work, but that's a lot of money to pay every single year when there's one kid, and sometimes there's more. There's probably up to, I don't know, 8 to 10 kids that might need to be bused, but I feel like these little things need to be looked at. That's it.
My name is Carol Kaufman. I reside in Addison. Thanks for your service. I know we have some confrontation going there sometimes, but Chair Rakowski presented a few constituent ideas believed to improve our current situation at the board's November 18 meeting. With transparency being at the forefront of Act 46, hiring an outside education expert consultant would sooner than later bring the community and school staff a voice, resources, and potential answers this board will need to make upcoming challenging decisions. I recommend Chuck Scranton, Executive Director of the Rowland Foundation. Chuck Scranton has a long history in education. He is visionary, innovative, and he currently engages with public schools throughout Vermont. He has the expertise to bring to the taxpayers and school board the studies, research, what is working and what isn't working. Chuck Scranton could be the consolidation reports we have never received within the continuing state consolidation effort. Money. From FY19, the School Board of Education Service line item grew 20,000. I would like to request 20,000 be made available one time from line item 2310 to hire Chuck Scranton's services and maybe other unknown consolidation reconfiguration study costs. The ANWSD community and taxpayers deserve what I call an outside second opinion. In the end, Chuck Scranton would make recommendations to this board. As in board education, I don't think you could get any better. Chair Rakowski also referenced a constituent's desire for more RETN board recordings. Personally, I would be satisfied if RETN just recorded the regular board meetings. All board committee meetings, board retreats could easily be recorded just for sound and posted on the ANWSD website. All town municipality meetings are and have been recorded for decades. In the spirit of transparency, it's time the school board record all meetings. A few questions from tonight. Well, not questions, not allowed to ask questions. I would like to request a legal opinion regarding voters opposing closure of the elementary school in Addison and reconfiguration into a SPED school. And I would like that legal opinion to be made public. I would also like to request public recommendations be included in board minutes, such as Matt Vogel's. I would like to request that all the public information tonight be included in the minutes. I would like to request the board to use ACSD annual report as a template for the upcoming ANWSD report. You would curb my questions greatly. And see, 2012, I have been carrying this around since 2012, hoping one day this school board would up their reporting. And if you just compare theirs online to ours, you'll see what I mean. Why the ANWSD is top 15 in Vermont. And this will also show you, I actually got the school district to put this in the report one time, but it's a calculation that should be in every report. But what it shows you is deficit refunding. And because of huge deficits, and we have been paying a lot extra in taxes in our system. School choice is the fastest track to growth, and I really believe you need to give SPED school choice. And consider open enrollment for your 2001 decision for school choice. I think you do it in January. And I just think that as you go forward, if you're doing what's great, parents will choose to come to your school. Otherwise, you need to give them choice.
Other comments? Yes.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Franklin from Addison. Just a couple comments that I'd like to make. I've been to all the meetings and watched them on TV as well. I thank you, first of all, for recognizing finally tonight that the voters of Addison did vote to keep their school open as an elementary school. However, I do want to reiterate that that did not mean all ed. That was not on the ballot. The ballot read as an elementary school. That's how the voters voted. So if you're thinking about reconfiguring in that kind of way, you really need to have that conversation with the residents, and they need to be on board with it, because closing our school is enough, and then refiguring to something that they didn't know that that's what it was going to be, because I also know that there's a lot of people in town that would have thought if they were not going to have the school open as is, they would have voted to close it, buy it back for $1, and figure out something else to do with it. So you really need to have that conversation with them before you make this kind of a decision that you're just going to put all ed in there. The other thing I would like to address is several comments that I've heard about poor Addison, not many students in there, they're so disadvantaged. No, they're not. I taught in Addison for several years. I also had the privilege of substituting there for many, many years. Being a small school has its advantages. It's not about the classes that are offered or the languages or the sports. It's about the teacher-student ratio, the getting to know the students. My first year of teaching, I had 31 kids in 5th grade. A few years later, Panton kids left, went down to half. What I was able to do with those smaller numbers was amazing. I was able to do so much more with the students, give them so much more of my time, foster their growth, whether they need special needs or if they were gifted and needed something more. There is something to be said about those small student-teacher ratios. In Addison, we've been blessed to have that for quite a long time now. Those students have gotten used to having that interaction with those teachers that know everything that they need to know about them. When I was substituting, I knew every single student from K to 6. I knew who they were, I knew their families, I knew everything about them, and I was just a substitute. There was something to be said about that. That can't be found in a larger school. So to take our students from something that's so intimate and so nurturing, and I'm not saying that the other schools are not nurturing, I'm just saying a smaller facility gives that to those students. And if you're going to take that away from them, just giving them more busing is not going to cut it. And Bill, I appreciate the offer about the student busing, but there's more needs for our students than just the busing. They're going to be losing that intimate feel that they get from those small classrooms. And my concern for my grandchildren that are now going through that school is making sure that they have that same ability that my children had when they were at that school. I hate to see that be lost. I understand all the financials and everything about it, but we really have to take a look at that as well, because that's really important. And it may not be a lot of kids, but to those kids, it's really important. So I'm asking you to please, and I know it's already in your forefront of your mind, I hope, but please consider that, and please also be careful about saying they'll be better off in Virgins, they'll be better off in a bigger school, because that isn't true for every student. It may be for some, but it isn't for all of them. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
My name's Jenna Santamaria. I reside in Virgins, and I just kind of want to follow up with what you were saying. I'm questioning some discussion that I heard tonight by the board, especially centering around repurposing Addison, moving kids out, but then keeping central office as is. I hear the concern about moving central office, like the cost of personnel, moving without a plan, but then I have to question, how is this okay to do to our smallest learners? There's no concrete plan for Addison kids. We need to figure out licensure for teachers, seniority of teachers, space, and transportation. These are big issues. And to do that from after the budget appeal period ends in April until August, that gives us essentially 4 months. That's not a lot of time. We don't have a real plan for any aspect. And this is what our community has said since late August. You can't move teachers, students, or administration without a plan. And Addison and Ferrisburg came out to the polls and told you that overwhelmingly. If central office, which is comprised of highly educated, professional working people, cannot endure a move without plans, we cannot in good faith ask our smallest and arguably most vulnerable population to endure a very similar move. These are 5 to 12-year-olds in their formative years. If, as stated tonight, that we as a district won't be settled in 2 years, why are we reconfiguring kids for next school year? I am highly concerned about our priorities as a district after hearing this conversation.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Yes.
Chris Cahart. Yeah, for 3 months now, we've been hearing from our fellow community members about how, if we have to cut, we should be cutting stuff at the supervisory, the central office level. We've been telling the people that we have enough space in these buildings to close down 2 schools, and yet we're not willing to make that move to move the central office into a school. Even if it does cost a little bit more, you're going to save in the long run, and just the optics of it are bad. I mean, I routinely have people coming up to me and saying, how are we spending money on a separate office for the central office if we've got so much room in these schools? That's got to be a priority, and cuts at that central office level have to be a priority if you expect to pass budgets, because people make decisions based on that alone. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Okay, we have one item up for discussion, board discussion, policy C40. John, do you want to
Yeah.
read that?
Ready? Here we go.
We are ready.
Okay, so if you look at C40, what we're going to do is we need to talk through some of the choices that we're thinking about, that we've been talking about for a really long time. The choices being middle school, and the other choice talking about the alternative education at Addison, okay? So, here's a couple of recommendations. We're gonna vote on this at we're gonna make some adjustments here, and then we're gonna vote on this at our next meeting, okay? So, I've gone around on a couple of things. So first of all, if you go and look, there's some easy things that we can do. Number one is, okay, first of all, let me go back. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because we need to make it clear where students go to school. There's no way around this. We have to do this, where their home school is. We are not ending school choice. We have another policy, C41, that allows for any parent at any time to petition to be able to move their student, okay? So we're not eliminating school choice. So a couple of things that we can do, given the conversations that we've had so far. Number one is we can eliminate because this was written before November 5th, we can eliminate the red that says, or Virgin's Union Elementary School for the town of Ferrisburg for right now. Okay?
Yeah.
So my suggestion is that we make this adjustment as if we were going to vote it up or down. And I do not believe that we need to decide about the middle school. We don't have to put any language in here about middle school happening in a particular year, because that decision sounds like it's going to be made with the superintendent and with others. So we would be able to just write at the very top line, K4 students are assigned to schools based on the attendance areas in which their parents or legal guardians reside. And then that allows the superintendent, the middle school teachers to move, to create a middle school at the timing that they think is best. And if we don't want to do that, our other option is just to literally write it in here. In 2021 and 2022, K4 students will be assigned in this way, and we'll write it that way. So I think it's simpler that we don't need to do that, and That would be my suggestion about that. My suggestion about the town of Addison is that, given that we're moving down the road to considering repurposing the Addison Central School as an alternative education space, that we change the language of the town of Addison, that they will attend the Virgins Union Elementary School, and that we write it here, and we talk about it with our community members, and we vote it up or we vote it down the next time we meet. And then I propose that we eliminate the K-1 through 12 alternative education at the bottom, because that would be, we would not need it. That policy does not cover that special education. All right. That's my suggestion.
So the top in red would be 4.
K-4.
Yep.
So John, K4 at the top, we would just be purposely silent on 5, 6.
We would be saying that we know for sure that K-4 are going to be attending
Yes.
these schools, and we're uncertain about what's going to happen exactly about 5 and 6.
Okay.
It is actually an elementary school transfer policy, and if we're assuming 5 and 6 are going to be in middle school, we don't need to speak to that.
Yeah.
And we're not writing Addison, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Go
Not
ahead.
writing, space.
I know.
We're not writing, Town of Addison, Virgins Union, or Ferrisburg, because we have a choice policy.
Right. The purpose of this policy is to make sure everyone has a home school, and we're not like waiting for a family to make a decision to place a child, right?
It's the default.
It's the default,
Right,
yeah.
so if,
Yeah.
excuse me, so if we, thank you, if we say Town of Addison goes to Virgins Union Elementary School, and we vote in a budget, or we adopt a budget that does not include the alternative school, repurposing Addison for the alternative school, and leaves Addison as is, what does that do for us?
I'm sorry, say
Yeah,
it
we
again.
would, we wouldn't
If
want
we
to do
don't-
that.
I'm sure we wouldn't.
Right,
What
but I
I'm
think,
saying is, okay, so then, I'm just asking for a hypothetical.
Yes.
Right? So let's say in January, we bring this up to vote, it says Virgins Union Elementary, and in the interim, we have adopted a budget, or at some point, we've adopted a budget not to go down the path where ACS is reconfigured. Then we do have a problem.
Yes, but we would just revise this policy. I mean, policies are meant to, I mean, here's another option, okay? We can get rid of all of that language at the top, and we can say something like this. We as a board empower the superintendent to make choices on a yearly basis about where students go to school based on the best educational quality of the education that students would get. And then, for example, we would empower the superintendent to just say, if we're going to have a school class, and a elementary school class that's going to have 11 or 12 in it, and that's 2 grades, right? And that's never going to even come close to meeting our per pupil size. That's a huge cost to us, as all of us, that we would just empower the superintendent to make that choice. And that class is not going to meet there, and they would go over. We could do that, but I don't think we want to do that. I think the board needs to be the owner of this right now, and we need to write what it says. And I think based on our conversations, we need to write it in such a way that we're moving along the same lines that we just voted for a few minutes ago, and that would be what I said, K-4, and then, yeah.
There's not another school that has that policy that you just said that gives the superintendent, that says the superintendent. I mean, is there one out there that does that, do you know?
No, but there's no reason, I mean, who controls where students go to their home school? It's either the superintendent or it's us.
Yeah, I just didn't know if there was one that you.
It's not a power of the electorate to choose this.
Well, they're trying, but there's significant and growing momentum to not even let us be delegated with that, and so
Yeah,
for us to
well,
then delegate.
we'll talk about
yeah,
that,
that's
but I
another-
mean, that's,
Yeah.
we're the
But
delegates of that.
I wanted to come back
in
though,
law.
I just wanted to come back to I'm not like forming an opinion, I'm just I'm trying to like understand. We would just say K through 4.
That's right.
Right, and then 5 or 6, we just leave that open as Like, would we eventually refine that and change it once we know, or?
So they would be no longer elementary school students.
But we haven't decided as a board yet if, right, you know what I mean?
Which
You mean in the limbo?
we haven't even
Yeah.
voted on that yet, too.
Right.
We're just getting some language here that we can
Oh,
either vote
okay,
up or
okay,
down.
all right, I
We're not
gotcha.
voting, this is
Yeah,
a discussion.
Okay, thank you, John.
Yeah.
John, can you remind us?
George wants to-
Sorry. John, I thought that you made a really good proposal there, because in essence, it is the superintendent that makes that decision. She might come to us and ask us to rubber stamp that, but she is the one that decides where people go to school based on what's best for them and what teaching staff is available there. I think that your one paragraph shot at it that says that we give the authority to her makes sense.
Okay.
Can you remind us why we have to change this before we've made a decision?
We don't, but we need to,
Make a decision.
we need to write, we need
Yes,
to
we do.
refine it so that we'll be ready to make a decision. All right, I mean, we could make a motion, we could leave it.
Is there a reason why the
and
policy,
then-
why the policy can't be changed in April?
Because we need to decide what we're gonna do about middle
Because we need to
school.
make a decision. This is the mechanism for our decision.
No, this is a
And this is-
reflection of our decision.
Yeah, and we need to decide and use this, based on, we need to decide about middle school, what we're going to do. And we need to decide about what we're gonna do with CVA, this alternative education, and we need to decide where we're gonna put all of our students.
I agree with that, but what I'm unclear about is why we're changing we need to make those decisions, right? And we've spent 3 hours tonight talking about those decisions in one way or another, but I don't think we're yet at the.
Well, and that's why we're in discussion now.
Yeah, we're just
This is
discussing.
just,
I think there's,
these are
in
the,
your town, though, we're putting the cart before the horse here a bit. I mean, I think we need to make some of these decisions, and then, once we've made some of these decisions, then we can decide,
Yeah.
write the policy,
Can
So-
like that.
So
we
what,
make-
so what I'm giving us is a process to get to the decision point. The process is, we need to make some revisions here, and I need your approval, or that we would go down this process. If you don't like my process, then let's come up with something else. But my process would be, we write in here so that it's crystal clear to the public and everybody else that we're moving down a path where we're gonna have a middle school that could have 5 or 6, okay? And that we're still moving down a path in which Addison Central School kids, K through 6, go to Virginia's Union Elementary School, and there is an alternative education.
You mentioned earlier, John, that the idea of not trying to like transpose the school choice within the district into C40, because we already have a C41.
That's right, that's right.
I buy that. I think it makes sense to have a home. I think there's a lot of good reasons for that, for there to be a home school, but, you know what I mean, not a home school. But I don't want to go there. But we also, can we have an opportunity to look at C41? Because I would say today, it doesn't achieve real true school choice. I think it's fairly limited. It's, there's a lottery system. There are only so many people who can make those choices. There are people in schools now who would like to not be in those schools and would like to move. And if there's a way that we can also bring up C41 for conversation, I think that would be great. Because I think the two should go.
But I mean, I don't know that there are schools that.
I think that if you were going to do that, you would really want to think long and hard about your proposal to repurpose Addison Central School, because right now I can't accommodate anyone else at Ferrisburg. So if suddenly the desire was for Addison residents to simply move into Ferrisburg, we would be adding the same number of staff that we have at Addison to Ferrisburg to accommodate those students.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is if we don't repurpose Addison and we just keep it as it is, That's exactly what I'm saying, is that if half of those kids want to leave and they want to come to Ferrisburg or Virgins on their own, then we move the teachers with them and find a way to make that. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that that's the decision. I would like to know more about what that would look like, because there are a lot of people in Addison who don't want to be there right now.
I'm only aware of one family who was
Okay.
not accommodated through school choice.
I think that this is probably a conversation for the policy committee to be having.
Okay.
And I do think there was a lot of conversation when that policy was first drafted about why there's that why there's those limits and.
We had the conversation.
I was probably responsible for it. I was concerned about an exodus, but I think at this point, the barn door is open, or it's it's kind of a moot point at this point, let me put it that way.
Okay, well, I'll bring it up at the next
I mean,
policy.
okay.
I
I know we're getting tired.
Yeah.
I just would like to know what Sheila thinks about the idea of giving the responsibility to you.
No, thanks.
Come on, it's
Yeah.
only 9:30.
One more hour.
Come pull it out.
So,
thanks.
how about, I mean, does anyone have any other suggestions aside from what John has said in terms of editing this?
John's draft
Look,
sets us up
it'll
for.
clarify it down, and we'll be better able to be like, I'm gonna vote for it or I'm not
Yes,
gonna vote for it.
it accomplishes that.
Okay?
I think, to not try to make light of that either, I think I really rely on the policies to help me to guide decision-making. I don't want to be in a position where I'm making decisions based on some criteria that might be invisible to other people. So policy really provides that framework for decision-making. So I think it's essential. I think the only case I would bring it back to you is if a class size got so small. We had 1 or 2 or 3 kids in a class, and I was saying, this makes no sense. I really can't, make that suggestion. I would be coming to say, we really need to move those students to another school for this 1 year, because this is the size of this class, or what have you. But otherwise, I would rather lean on the policy for those decisions.
When are you hoping to have this go for us for the next meeting, or after budget's passed, or what's our timeline for making that map red?
So we have 2 more meetings before, we have 2 meetings before we need to adopt the budget. And so I think, having talked to John, was that we were thinking these 2 decisions would be hand in hand, which budget we adopt and how the changes to policy C40 would be made. So.
I mean, we were trying to move down this path. There's no way to not bring C40 back up again tonight and do this again. We just have to do this, because it's really important, and it tells students where to go. And that's what much of our conversation has been about for this last 3 months. So if you'll allow me, if you're okay, to further hone it down, to make it clear that it replicates the general intentions of where we are right now as a board, at least by the vote that we just took to encourage for the school budget, that we would do K4 students are assigned, knowing that, and this is really important, that we are all pretty much on the same page, at least with the administration, that we haven't exactly decided that middle school, like 5 and 6, are going to go up to the middle school this year, but that's not like we're not like strongly pushing that for right now. So we don't have to make that choice right here. So I'm saying K4, students are assigned, Town of Addison goes to Virginia's Union Elementary School, Town of Ferrisburg goes to Virginia Union Elementary, to Ferrisburg, and we eliminate the lines at the bottom that say K1, K12, alternative education, all that stuff. Cleans us up.
So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
I'm a parent of a 5th or 6th grader in Addison. Where do my kids go to school?
That will be decided when, the next time that we come together, when the school board and the administration and the middle school teachers all decide whether 5th and 6th grade are moving up this year, or whether 5th and 6th grade are moving up next year, or whether 5th or just 6th is moving up. We haven't decided yet.
I thought we had decided we were waiting a year for the elementary school students to move.
I don't know.
I thought we had.
Yeah.
I didn't remember it that way.
I
That's
thought
how
we
I
were
remembered
still
it, too.
talking about it.
Is that how you remembered it, or?
No, I thought it was off the table.
Right.
It's not a part of any of these.
We didn't build it into any of the budgets.
Right.
Yeah.
So then,
It
I,
came off the table at
Okay.
the point you didn't ask us to pursue any budget
Right.
options that
then,
supported that. It
Right.
was
for next year,
not
they're
very
gonna,
momentous
they
an occasion,
likely
but
will be
it
going to Virginia's Union Elementary School.
Well, I'm just, we don't have a policy. She wants a
Yeah.
policy, so we'll need to get a policy.
There you go.
So they
Right?
will
I mean,
be.
if if we're gonna
Better
find,
to put it for that year.
Keep it through K through 6 for the next year.
yes.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
Yep.
And then we'll change it when
We'll change
they
it
do
the
move.
following year.
Okay.
With the understanding that this year would be used for the preparation of the
Right.
Then,
Like-
then here's how I think we should write it. Then let's put the date in. I'm gonna write it like
I was
this.
just going to
In
say that.
2021, 2022, K-4 students are assigned to these schools. And we'll go that way. Okay. And then we can talk about this again next time.
I need to make one statement about this internal control. I really wish we had had an opportunity to look at it first, because we should have been able to talk about it. There is some stuff on here, at least some small things that we've been dealing with, but we should be talking about it. I'm not gonna, make a motion to change our
We can still talk
vote.
about it next time. We can still talk
But we voted to have you sign it as is.
Right.
Okay. It's not gonna,
Well, or just points made that next year we should be.
Right.
yeah,
There's nothing that's.
this should not be handled this way next year, okay? Thank you.
I agree.
Yep. And yeah, it hasn't been in past years either.
Yes,
so-
it's been,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
I understand why, I just don't want it to happen again. Okay?
Point taken.
Thank you.
Are we
No
done here?
criticism intended at all.
None taken.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Excellent, thank you.